Good afternoon. I will call the Legislative Commission on Data Practices to order. The first order of business is to approve the minutes of October 31st. Representative Lucero, would you like to move the minutes?
So moved.
Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor of adoption of the minutes, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. The minutes are adopted. Today we're going to hear from law enforcement regarding the various technologies that are being employed and might possibly be employed in the future. And I welcome members' comments. I know we only have a couple of people from the public that have signed up to testify. If there are others, we will get to that towards the end of today. With that, let's just get this show on the road. First, we're going to cover automated license plate readers, and Ms. Christensen, I believe, is going to give us a presentation, and then that will be followed by Chief Jeff Potts from Bloomington. Welcome to the commission. Go ahead and introduce yourself for the tape, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Stacy Christensen. I'm the Director of the Data Practices Office in the Department of Administration. And I think this is much less of a presentation and more of an update, just kind of how the automatic license plate reader biennial audits from the department's perspective have just kind of what has been happening. So just kind of a brief reminder for folks that maybe need a reminder. The license plate reader legislation went into effect in 2015, which included an audit requirement. As part of that audit requirement, independent biennial audits on the technology needed to be completed beginning in August 1st of 2017, and the Commissioner of Administration has the obligation to review those audits. So in terms of kind of what the Commissioner is looking at, and just kind of based on a lot of the questions that we are receiving from the law enforcement community, we developed the information page that you all should have in your packets that gives kind of the background and kind of what the checklist might be for what would need to be within that audit. So that's kind of what folks have been basing them off of. There is not a requirement to notify the Department of Administration if you're using the technology, but there is a requirement to notify the BCA. So we've been working off the list that the BCA maintains on their website as to who has this particular technology, and then kind of tracking it that way. We have received, or there are 45 agencies that are on that list who've reported to the BCA, and we've received 6 reports that have been reviewed and are all in compliance. I did receive 3 more this morning, so a total of 9. So the reports that we've received so far are from the Duluth Police Department, the Golden Valley Police Department, the Richfield Police Department, the Shakopee Police Department, South St. Paul, and West St. Paul. And then this morning I received reports from Crystal, Brooklyn Center, and Robbinsdale. Based on the statute, there isn't a way to kind of track when those reports in each particular agency might come due. It's based on when they start using the program. So we'll just receive them as we receive them. So that is basically all I have.
Member questions? So what you're saying is because they've gotten this technology at different times, then the audits are due at different times. Basically, we're allowing them some time to get up to speed and actually have something to be audited.
Yep, Madam Chair, that's correct.
I've gotten a few of those copies myself, and I've been kind of amazed that really all I've received is sort of an executive summary saying, yeah, they're all in compliance. There really aren't any specific numbers as far as, I think there was one report, it might have been Shakopee, that said, yeah, we had, we used it this many times, we had this many hits, and those sorts of things. But I was kind of underwhelmed by the amount of information that was really in there in the audit, and maybe that's something that we need to get a little more specific on, and on how we want the reports to be sent to us. When the when the Department of Administration is reviewing the audits or the reports, are you seeing more information than what I'm actually getting? No, that's all you're getting too?
Yes, Madam Chair. So the statute just says the commissioner has to review the reports summarizing the results. So we're seeing everything that you're saying as well. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thanks for your testimony,
Yes.
appreciate it.
Madam Chair, I have a
Oh,
question.
yep, go ahead, Senator.
Ms. Christensen, back when the license plate reader was being passed in the legislature, the equipment was already in use by at least the Minneapolis Police Department. There might have been other police entities that did that. At that time, the major issue that surrounded license plate readers was, what do you do with the non-subject data, and how many days do you maintain that? If memory serves me correctly, it might be 90 days?
60 days.
60, okay. And can you tell me, how is that information, after 60 days, how is it disposed of? Is there any record that is kept by your agency, or is it all disposed of in some manner?
Ms. Christensen.
Madam Chair, Senator Limmer, I don't know the answer to that question. We don't have any data that's provided to us related to the disposal of the
I
data.
think that's probably a question for our next testifier. Mr. Potts is shaking his head.
Okay.
And so
All
I
right.
think that's a question for law enforcement. Right. All right, any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Christensen. All right, Chief Potts. Welcome to the commission, and thanks for being here. Thanks for what you do.
Thanks, Madam
And-
Chair.
Yeah.
I brought with me one of our commanders that oversees our investigative division that can help with the presentation here. Her name is Kim Clausen, and
Okay.
we have a few slides to go through.
All right.
And then stand for any questions you might have after that. And
Is
I
that
think,
Clausen with the C?
Clauson.
All right. Very good.
I think the presentation may answer the senator's question as we go through.
Perfect. Go ahead.
So as was already mentioned, we have a slide that just shows you the number of agencies in the state that are using LPR. This is directly from the BCA's website, just as was mentioned by Ms. Christensen. Just a quick little background from the city of Bloomington and how we're using LPR, and a little bit of background. We've with program, our LPR program was first proposed in 2012. We funded our program almost entirely through state and federal grants, the state grant being basically an auto theft prevention grant, and we have also used some federal grants in how we've developed the program since then. We're currently operating 5 mobile systems, that is that they're on 5 squad cars. Each squad car that has an LPR system has 4 cameras, 2 that point forward in opposite directions and 2 that point to the rear in opposite directions. They run on Sprint Air Cards. Funding for our program this past year came by way of the Auto Theft Prevention Grant. That was able to bring us 1 additional mobile unit.
Mr. Potts, real quickly.
Yes.
What was the amount of that grant? What's it costing to run this program?
That annual grant was $18,700, and a system for a mobile unit is approximately,
That's the cost for the one mobile system is $18,700 was the estimated price from the vendor, and that was what we were awarded.
Okay. But that's just one, and you have 5.
we have 5 mobile units, and I'll get to the other
Okay,
systems that we
sure.
have here in just a couple of slides.
Sorry.
Madam Chair. Primarily, what we've seen with LPR, although there's several databases that the BCA manages that the license plates are run against, we see our biggest kind of day-to-day benefit of the system in recovering stolen vehicles. As you can see, in 2015, there were 8 recoveries at Mall of America, where we have some stationary units mounted. In 2016, that rose to 21 auto theft recoveries, 14 of those by the LPR systems that are permanently or stationary fixed at Mall of America, and another 7 auto theft stolen autos recovered on those mobile units. So far in 2017, we've seen that increase so far this year. I think this is data through November 1st, roughly. There's 20 stolen vehicles recovered through the use of the stationary units at Mall of America, and another 4 with the mobile units. And from a cost standpoint, or from a return on that grant dollar investment, you see there's quite a return just in the area of recovering stolen autos. There are other investigative uses for the license plate reader system. It expands the investigative capabilities. We talked at great length back in 2015 about one of our cases here where we had a spree of crimes along Normandale Boulevard. It was the LPR system that helped us. It was instrumental in helping us solve that case. It helps us identify possible suspects, which is exactly what it did in that case that we highlighted back in 2015. Important point to note here, it rules out innocent people. We find it very valuable in ruling out people that we may have heard or may have included as on our list of suspects. Provides evidence to bolster prosecutions. It's helpful in locating shootings and homicide suspects. Votive is a violent offender task force. If they are working on an investigation where they're aware of a license plate, that LPR system can be helpful in locating folks that they're looking for. And of course, as I've already mentioned, recovering stolen vehicles. So far, this is the data for requesting our data, our read data in furtherance of an investigation. So the vehicles that we scan are sitting in a server, and where they can become valuable to an investigation is when a detective working in our agency or someone working on a legitimate law enforcement purpose from another agency makes a formal request to us. You can see the volume of requests that we've gotten over the last 2+ years, 15. We had 51, 2016 it went up to 111, and so far this year we've had 81 requests to look at the read data. As you recall, back in 2015, we passed some legislation. You all passed some legislation regarding the use of license plate readers. That is that is the point in time when the retention period for the data was set at 60 days. There were qualifications based and limits on information sharing. It required a log of the use of the system. As was mentioned previously, it required biannual audits of the use of the LPR systems. Authorization to access the data internally. The chief law enforcement officer or a designee would have to authorize access to the data. That was a part of the law. And also, as was mentioned, each agency is required to notify the BCA that they are using LPR. And if they're using it in a stationary capacity, they're required to notify the BCA of the location of the stationary unit.
Chief Potts?
Yes.
If you could go to the previous slide. I wasn't clear on who's requesting the read data. What, I missed part of that. I think I was writing something
Sure.
down.
Madam Chair, that would be where an investigator from our agencies that is working on a case and they have a suspect vehicle, for example, with a license plate, they would go to the person that I've designated to manage the program and ask, in this case, Commander Clausen, I'm working on a burglary investigation, for example. I have a suspect vehicle with a plate of, 123 XYZ. Can you search the LPR database to see if we've read that plate?
Okay.
Commander Clausen would then go to the database and search by specific.
Okay, thank you.
This slide just quickly outlines what was required back in the 2015 legislation for the use of LPR. And just to highlight the biannual audit, as was mentioned, it's an independent audit, meaning it's outside of the agency. The costs, we have contracted with the same firm that does our financing audits for the city of Bloomington, and they are charging in that range, between 5, and they estimate it because these audits are not something that have been done before, and so it's the first time for most of these auditing firms or the folks that are doing these audits, and so it's a little bit of a range there. The audit involves, obviously, the independent auditing group coming in and working with the system. Ours has taken a little bit of time just because they weren't familiar with the software, and there's quite a bit of pieces of this audit to conduct, and so we're in the late stages of that. Our interpretation, I think in consultation with the Department of Admin, was that we're auditing data through July 31st. Starting in August 1st is when the audit began, and we were under contract at that point in time to complete that audit. Our initial findings from the auditing firm are that our audit is clean. We're waiting on a final draft of that, at which time we will then file with the Department of Admin as we're required to by law. The auditing firm works with our IS department, our investigators, our dispatch, who are kind of on the front end when there's a hit. The dispatchers are involved. Of course, our clerical unit and our radio technician, who really is one of the key persons in terms of installing and managing the LPR software and hardware. Madam Chair, that completes our presentation. We'll stand for any questions if you have any.
Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony, Chief Potts. Chief, I have two questions. One relates to your decisions of how you deploy these. Bloomington's in a different position than a lot of other cities would be, just based on the traffic that you have through the Mall of America. So you've dedicated, I can't remember if you said 4 out of 7 or 3 out of 7, or how many there were, to the mall as stationary units. Is that correct?
Potts.
Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, we have 5 mobile, and how many stationary? I'll defer to Commander Clausen on the exact number of camera systems at Mall of America.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Representative Lush, we currently have 16 stationary cameras operating at the Mall of America. They're covering all the inbound lanes of traffic into the mall and some of the outbound lanes.
Okay.
Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, that's over 75% of your stationary, which I'm assuming you get more bang for the buck there, which makes sense. But this relates to a second question I have, and this is not, I guess, part of the audit requirements. However, when we were passing this, I expressed reservations about the disparate impact that the decisions about deployments of these units would have on certain groups. For this reason, I know that, having prosecuted for St. Paul for 15 years, I know where the squads are generally during the day in the Western District, the Central District, East District. And I know that they're not in the white areas of town. They go to where they receive the calls, and they receive the calls in neighborhoods, which I assume this is also true, and to a certain extent in Bloomington as well, where there is a higher percentage of people of color. That makes me question the disparate impact of how these units are being used, because you can say, well, hang on a second, we've got rules that apply to everyone the same way. We're not targeting people of color, but I can tell you that I suspect that as a matter of practice, there will be more people of color that police departments are collecting data on than there are folks who aren't people of color. And that is a disparate impact, which the Supreme Court has stated is an issue. Whether you intended to do it or not, it's a disparate impact. In your decisions about how to deploy these units, have you taken any of that into consideration when you decide how to deploy them, whether they're mobile units or stationary units?
Chief Potts.
Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, so as you can see on the slide here, with 5 mobile units in the city of Bloomington, here's what drives our decision on where those mobile units are deployed. We have 5 patrol areas from east to west, from north to south. We try and put these in our, what we call the area cars, and so we're having cars equipped with license plate reader equipment deployed citywide. The caveat would be if we had, for example, a string of crimes like we did when I talked about this in 2015, where we had a bunch of crimes happening along Normandale Boulevard. Somebody was throwing objects out of a vehicle. To us, it made sense that we would deploy our LPR cars who have a patrol responsibility in close proximity to where those crimes are occurring. Sole reason is to try to capture, hopefully, suspect information at times near to when these crimes are being occurred. And so that would be the only change in deploying these cars citywide. We have 5 patrol areas in the entire city. We try and have LPR cars out in all those area cars. We'll change that decision is if there's a string. Doesn't happen all that often, fortunately, in Bloomington, but that would drive the decision to, at times, temporarily use our LPR resources in an area to capture more, hopefully, information that might help us solve that crime. That doesn't happen very often. Like I said, we like to have these vehicles deployed citywide. not in certain areas based on demographics, but across the entire city from east to west.
Representative Flash.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that answer, Chief Potts. You know, and I know that decisions, I don't know of a single police department that would make a decision of, well, I guess I should qualify that. I don't know of police departments in this state that make decisions on how to deploy either resources, be they cameras or squads or whatever, based on demographics, but, you know, they do get deployed based on responses, and sometimes that can aggregate to a disparate impact. So, and that may not be the situation that Bloomington finds itself in now, but I wanted to say, Madam Chair, that I will have that question of other law enforcement officers who testify today and in the future on this too, because for me, it's an ongoing concern. So thank you for your answer, Chief Potts.
I had a couple questions. Initially, when you got your first set of LPR, you did it kind of in conjunction, well, you got the grants, and then you did that kind of in conjunction with Mall of America, or you deployed them there? Is that right? Am I tracking that?
Madam Chair, the first LPR systems that we implemented were through an auto theft prevention grant, and they were on squad cars. It was about the third year that we were the recipient of a federal grant, Homeland Security grant, through Homeland Security. And it was at that time when we decided to implement stationary units at Mall of America through that grant. So
Okay.
it was the second phase, I guess, if you will, for our LPR program.
Okay, and is it true that Mall of America talked about purchasing those from your department, and did that ever happen?
Madam Chair, to my recollection, there was no discussion about them purchasing. What it required is, because the Mall of America is private property, it required a memorandum of understanding for the use of the system, and that memorandum of understanding still exists, but the city of Bloomington is the sole owner and user of the LPR system installed at Mall of America.
Okay, so if you have 16 stationary units out there, do they have their own people that operate that system out there, or is that done by your department?
Madam Chair, that's done exclusively by our department.
Okay, all right, thank you. And do you have, do any of your LPR have, I'm, reading some of these technologies and how they're advancing the cameras and so forth, are any of your LPR equipped with facial recognition technology?
Madam Chair, the LPR system, by its nature, does not have facial recognition features attached to it, nor does it have the capability of the cameras take pictures of license plates. Now, there are times when the view of the license plate may have some kind of periphery areas where you might be able to see people, but there's nothing attached to the system, nor does the system have the capability to do facial recognition or anything other than convert that picture into letters and numbers as it relates to the license plate on the vehicle.
Okay. Because I've heard that some of them not only have that capability, but also the ability to kind of do a 360-degree look around wherever that plate happens to be.
Madam Chair, I'm not aware of that capability with our system. I'm not sure if the commander here has that.
Madam Chair, our cameras are a fixed focal point, and they're aimed directly at the traffic lanes to catch the vehicle license plates.
Thank you. Any other, Senator Limmer?
Thank you. Chief Potts, I'm trying to reason with myself of why would you put a license plate reader at a private institution like the Mall of America as opposed to Highway 494, which may have 100,000 plus cars going through it, and I don't think even on Black Friday you'd have that many cars coming through the Mall of America. Why is that such an important location for you to install a license plate reader there?
Chief Potts?
Madam Chair, Senator Limmer, the decision was made basically in our efforts to do what we can to protect the Mall of America, as obviously it's a location within the state of Minnesota that gets wide attention in terms of the number of people that go there. From a tourism standpoint, I think it's north of 40 million people per year at that one location. And so when we looked at the tools available to help protect that facility or that location, we felt that LPR would provide us with the capability that we didn't currently have. Now, keep in mind, the BCA manages a database of, that, consists of, I think, 13 different kinds of databases, including stolen vehicles, hot files, I guess we call them, one of which is a terrorist database. And so we felt like the LPR system gave us a capability that we didn't currently have. You mentioned why wouldn't we put that on 494? Well, the capabilities of the system and the speeds at which you can use it at, the speeds at 494 probably don't allow you to do that in a consistent manner. And so we felt like it made more sense for us to use those dollars to focus a little bit more exclusively at that piece of property. And we don't, because of, some of the hot lists consist of like driving after revocation, people without a license. We don't have that turned on from Mall of America. We've selected certain databases that we feel were appropriate for the use at Mall of America, and those are the only ones we access with those stationary systems.
Am I
Senator Lamb.
am I to conclude that at the Mall of America, license plate readers are used for general surveillance and not specifically looking for a particular subject?
Chief Potts.
Madam Chair, Senator Limmer, as was mentioned previously in the presentation, the only access to the database where the license plate reads are kept would be in connection to a specific investigation where a license plate of a suspect. So in terms of general surveillance, a lawful use of the system wouldn't allow you to just use it to surveil individuals for idle curiosity reasons, or it's in a log. Every read, every time we look at the database, it's logged, and the reason for the inquiry is also logged. That's a big part of the annual audit. I think what that does, Senator Limmer, is that all but eliminates the use of the system for surveillance purposes, but rather solving crimes.
And one last question. How do you dispose of the background information that you can only hold for 60 days? Where does that information go?
Chief Potts.
Madam Chair, Senator Limmer, I'm going to take a attempt at this, and I'll have Commander Costin clarify here. But as the way I understand the system is, like many other kinds of system, the data is essentially deleted on the 61st day, and it's a rolling 60-day period of time. And so every night the clock ticks on the 61st day, it's then recorded over by the next day. That data is now gone. We don't have access to it. On that 60th day, that is the last day that we will have the ability to access that read data. On the 61st day, it is gone.
So it's not maintained by a hard drive at all?
It's my Madam Chair, it's my understanding that that data is deleted on the 61st day. Could you confirm that?
Yeah.
Ms. Clausen.
Madam Chair and Senator Limmer, the data is purged through the software. It's set up with our information system employees to purge that data on the 60th day, and it was confirmed through our audit that that is being done, and it's being done accurately.
Okay. Madam Chair, the reason why I'm asking some of these more technical questions is that certain members of the legislature have been trying to get a better understanding of law enforcement in general has as far as resources of electronic tools. And even though some of us have attempted to put that into legislation, that we get an inventory of the tools that law enforcement has so that we can make appropriate policy decisions that would govern the use of that equipment, we haven't passed that yet. And as a result, we don't always know what law enforcement has right now. And so when we do have an opportunity to have law enforcement talk about specifics on electronic data collection, it's our one and only chance to ask these questions. So don't take it personally, but we're just kind of trying to understand all of the resource that law enforcement has. And once we knew that, whether or not we need to react as a legislature for appropriate policy.
Chief, do you contract with a third party for any of the services with the LPR? Or is that strictly internal?
Madam Chair, we have a contract with one vendor so far. A single vendor helps with the purchase. They're the provider of ours, and the servicer of that is a local vendor and only one vendor.
And do they, when the data that you're collecting now, is that cloud-based storage for those 60 days? How is that kept?
Madam Chair, that is on a server, hardware computer server in the city of Bloomington.
Okay. And so the third party, the vendor that you contract with, they don't have access to that server?
Madam Chair, they have access only when they're working at the city of Bloomington on our behalf, helping us, fix things that go down from time to time. As we add equipment and as we replace equipment, they would have access, supervised access at that time, but only at that time.
And I know you can't speak specifically to what other agencies are doing, but is that, in your experience, is that kind of modus operandi that most agencies operate as you do? They don't contract with a third party to store the information for them?
Madam Chair, I'll defer to Commander Clausen on that one because quite
Okay.
frankly, I'm not sure.
Commander Clausen.
Yeah, Madam Chair, that is my understanding, is most agencies that I've talked to, they operate the same way. A lot of them use the same vendor, and the vendors are very aware that we consider this to be our own data that we can't share with others, and so that is a selling point for those vendors, that they don't have access to it.
Okay. And one final question would be, are you sharing that data with any other, with the BCA, for instance? Is that any of the information that you're collecting being sent to be part of another database?
Madam Chair, not in a kind of bulk way. This slide would show you it's an individual request for read data from either investigators or sworn staff from our department pursuant to an investigation that they're working on, or another law enforcement agency pursuant to an investigation that they're working on. And we have to enter that into a log, and that's the only sharing of the data that we're currently conducting. That is in line with the current statute.
Right. Okay, thank you. Representative Lucero?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick question. In regards to your particular implementation of the software, it's on a server, as you mentioned, on your premises. How do you manage the backups then? So the backups and then the purging on the 61st day or redundancy of that server?
Chief Potts?
Madam Chair and Representative, I'll defer to Commander Clausen for that one.
Commander Clausen?
Madam Chair, Representative, I'm sorry, I can't see you, Luciano. I am working with IS through this audit. Recently, I learned a couple of the answers. It is very technical, and so our IS department handles the settings in the server for the purge and the backup. And so they have set the server to purge the data at 60 days, and they also manage the backup, which they went through with the auditor recently within the last few months and have confirmed that it's set to the right settings.
Oh, you're good? Anyone else? Thank you. Thank you for your testimony, for being here. Oh, wait. Representative Lesh.
Question. Madam Chair, can we have researchers, someone remind us, what's the penalty if they don't do that? What's the remedy in the legislation? Does anyone remember? Because I can't remember. We passed this a few years ago.
Mr. Diebel or Ms. Pontius?
If they don't do that, I mean,
Suspension of the program, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Representative Lesh, excuse me. Am I on or not?
Yeah,
Okay,
you are.
sorry. I mean, there'd be the general remedies under the Data Practices Act for damages. Intentional violations are a misdemeanor. I think I'd have to look at the body cam statute. I think there was something special in there for vendors.
So just to be clear, an intentional violation is a misdemeanor. If you can show, if there's a, I don't know, an email that says, yes, do not purchase at 60 days, then someone actually can go to jail for that? And if so, who would do it? Would it be the person who sent the email?
Ms. Pontius?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, yeah, it would be whoever violated the statute. I mean, I think there's only been maybe 1 or 2 cases over the years where there's actually been a prosecution.
Well, okay, Madam Chair, in reality, we're not going to find an email like that, I assume, so it would be negligent, therefore there'd be a civil suit. So would it be the same kind of remedies that we saw under violations with the DNR guy who was looking up every licenses, which is, what, $1,000 a crack or something? Or $10,000? 10,000?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, some of that was federal law too.
Okay.
So there, I mean, there are some penalties, civil penalties and remedies under data practices, but they're just kind of the generic ones.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Madam Chair and members, thank you for your time.
We're going to go to body cameras next. Chief Geiseke.
Good evening or good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I believe I saw your picture in an Anoka-Hennepin school district monthly.
That is correct,
Magazine that
Madam
we
Chair.
get.
Yes. It was a slow news week. They were looking for a story.
Welcome back to the commission, and we look forward to your comments today. Go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. Again, Eric Easkey, Burnsville Police Chief. My goal today is just give you a very high-level view of what we're doing for our body camera audits internally and how we're preparing to do for the external audit as well. Just to give you some quick background, we started body camera usage in the summer of 2010, so we've had them for just over 7 years. At that time, we started with a very small number of body cameras. It really took us 4.5 years before we got to what I would say full deployment, where all our officers in the front line have cameras today. It was a 4.5-year process, so we've had them out in the street full-time for 3 years now. Just a quick overview, we have 75 sworn officers. 57 currently are equipped with the cameras. Those, again, would be officers that I consider frontline officers that respond to calls, sergeants. We also have school resource officers, a community resource unit that wears them as well. So just to give you some idea, I don't wear a camera typically because it wouldn't make any sense, but investigators aren't assigned a camera as well. But just wanted to give you a sense that typically the people that do wear the body cameras are the ones out there each and every day responding to the calls. On average, we have about 22 cameras out on the street throughout the 24-hour period. What we've done for internal audits, just to make sure we're using the equipment the way we want it to be used, we do monthly reports, and what we do with those reports are basically, we'll look at the number of calls an officer has handled over the course of a 30-day period, compare that to the number of videos, and make sure it appears to be consistent. We also ask that the supervisor of that officer also take a look at that information to make sure there's no discrepancy. So the goal is, if we're giving you a camera, we want to make sure it's being used. We also run a report monthly on calls for service. And what we did with that was, just to give you an idea, Burnsville is a city, we handle somewhere between 45,000 to 50,000 calls a year for service, so it's somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000 calls a month. As we were trying to look at this and figure out how we could make sure we were in compliance with our home policy and the state statute, we looked at the calls for service and we compared it to the number of videos that we create each month, and just to make sure it's fairly consistent. And again, not every type of police call is going to have a video attached to it, but just kind of a very high level. We took the raw numbers and kind of looked at that to see if it made sense to us, and it certainly does. And we're also able to run monthly reports too about the actual cameras that are out there.
And Chief, real quickly, could you, for the benefit of the other members on the commission and those in the audience, could you tell us what your policy is on when an officer should turn their camera on? Because you stated that not every call is going to be recorded.
Correct. That's a good question, Madam Chair. Typically, what I will say is what we're discovering is the officers typically put the cameras on more than they're required to per policy. And the obvious times, and our policy is posted on our website, we're very transparent, you can get a copy of it. Anytime you're taking enforcement action, you're making traffic stops, you're arresting somebody, you're searching a vehicle, stopping somebody, we would require the officer to have that camera on. But our experience has been we discovered they're putting it on, turning it on more just in the event that something would happen they didn't anticipate. They don't want to be in a position they have to explain why the camera wasn't on. So they've really gone the other way to protect themselves and really to be transparent and gain trust from the community to show what they're doing out there. As I talked about the high-level view of just the calls for service and the type of things that we're doing, this slide, not to overwhelm you, but again, this is a report that we generate monthly. It goes to our city council. It gives you an example of the number of videos that we produce each month, the number of hours, and I'm not an IT person, gigabytes I can't explain technically, I just know that's quite a bit. It's on there as well. And I think to simplify it, when you look at the bottom portion, average per day, the number of videos we upload per day, it shows you we're using our cameras a fair amount. And I think that's a good thing in today's environment. We're actually, if you look at the number or the hours of video uploaded per day, it's running almost 24 hours a day on average. And again, that's just a snapshot of the gigabytes per day. Again, what I just showed, this is a spreadsheet of the entire year. So as we go through our calls for service, it varies month to month. Typically, calls for service might get higher in a given month for a number of reasons. We're again looking at consistency to make sure the calls for service are being reflected in the number of videos we produce. And this next slide, these are the type of calls where you typically would not have a camera activated. 911 hang-up call where you get canceled or those types of things. Administrative calls that we create a case file for. An example of that would be maybe a gun permit. False alarms. If we're out in the community doing community engagement or community-oriented policing, we wouldn't necessarily have the camera on. Extra patrol or follow-up to the case. So there's a significant number of calls that we go to we wouldn't require the camera to be on. I'd also ask you to consider the fact that nowadays we'll have multiple cameras running on a call, so that can affect the numbers as well. But this is just to give you somewhat of a high-level overview. Now this slide here, not to overwhelm you with information, but I do want to show that this shows that we are in compliance with the statute. It's a sample right in front of you. It's a lot to digest, but if you simplify it, you really look at the top portion, the applicable classification of the data. It shows that that's part of the requirement statute. We're documenting what the classification of that video is, the date and time it was captured and recorded, and whether or not it was destroyed or deleted is that next section. So it really kind of shows we can drill down really deep and kind of show that we're doing what we need to be doing with the information and deleting it when we need to delete it, and that the classification is correct and proper. One of the requirements of the statute too is whenever you use force resulting in great bodily harm or death, that's public data. And if you look about halfway down the slide here, it's highlighted in red. We unfortunately had an officer involved shooting last year resulting in a death, and that is a public redacted version that's available to the public. It shows that it's in our system, and you'll note there, that's the only one that doesn't have a deletion date, because we're required to keep that permanently. So I just wanted to have this available so you knew when we were deleting things, when we were capturing information, and this is one example of a report that we can actually create to do that. And also, anytime somebody goes into the system under a policy to look at a video, they're required to put a note in there as to why they're watching the video. And there's a lot of obvious reasons for that and good reasons to make sure we're accessing the information like we should and we're expected to do. And on the far right, you'll see notes in there. Those are two examples where one of the reports was reviewed by a supervisor, review for aggression resistance report. All our use of force incidents, they are reviewed by the supervisors. So they go in, they look at the situation to make sure it was used properly, and they'll put a document and note in there that they went in and looked at it. And just below that is another basic example. Somebody went in to look at their video because they may have not categorized it correctly or labeled it correctly. But typically you'll find that officers, unless they're preparing for court or there's some other reason, are not necessarily going in to review their own videos just because it's very time consuming.
Chief, there's no way we can see the fine detail on that.
Yes.
Would you provide your PowerPoint to the members?
Absolutely.
That'd be
Yeah.
really helpful. And that was what you answered. One of my questions was, are you using some of this video for training purposes and for accountability? And it appears that you are to a certain extent. is there someone, is it just in use of force cases that those videos are sort of flagged and reviewed, or do you review randomly other video as well?
You know, we review the videos if there's a need to, if we're notified of a question or concern, a complaint, or something we want clarification on, we'll review it. We don't randomly review them, just basically because we don't have the resources or the time to do it. For training purposes, a lot of times we'll use them when things turn out well. If somebody's been able to talk somebody out of a situation or help somebody, we'll use those videos as training video. We have one recently where 3 of our officers responded to a suicidal male on one of our bridges, and we captured that on video. They were able to basically save the guy's life, take him off the bridge, and we use that as a training tool to show other officers kind of how they were able to help this guy stay alive. So those are the situations and examples where we would use that in a training setting and then document that as well. The other thing I'd like to just point out as well, we're doing this internally to make sure we can show that we're in compliance with what the statute requires, but also I've checked with our city and our county attorney just to make sure we haven't had any situations where we've had a court case that the officers were there, we didn't have camera available. So I think that's a pretty powerful statement to say we're out there, we're using them, and they're being used for the purposes of prosecuting criminal cases. And I've checked with both city and county attorney recently, and they said we've had a good track record with that. So.
And on the substantial bodily harm piece, do you consider when someone is being tased, does it, in your opinion, meet that threshold?
That's a good question. I know there's case law out there that would say just the mere use of a taser wouldn't necessarily meet that threshold. I think you need to look at each individual tasing situation and determine whether or not that it fits the category. So I think there are some situations where the use of a taser may result in substantial bodily harm, and then that would in fact be public data.
Because I have a friend that recently went through training to be a law enforcement officer in Wisconsin, and they had to tase one another for part of their training. And she said, I literally thought I was going to die. And so I would think that would fall to substantial bodily harm in some way. And I understand that, I mean, the taser itself can leave marks on a person's body. So I just was curious as to how that's being understood. Senator Schoen.
Madam
I
Chair,
got Senator first.
Yeah,
You
thank you.
noticed
I just want to clarify, I've been tased, pepper sprayed, and gassed, and none of the times I actually thought I was going to die. So I just wanted to make sure that, and it's been multiple times.
That explains
Yeah.
a lot.
It's had an effect maybe that you
No,
don't realize.
so I want to make sure that, for the record, that is not the end goal of a taser.
All right.
With that, Madam Chair, members, I'll stand for any questions.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Chief, for coming down today. When we considered passing the body camera legislation, we heard a lot of concern about the bureaucratic requirements on the management of a police department and the cost for storage. Has that been a major issue for your department?
Well, I can only speak for Burnsville, Madam Chair, Senator. It hasn't been a major issue just because, fortunately for us, when we started this, we got support from our city council, and they were on board with it. So the costs have increased slightly over the years as we deployed more cameras, but we've built it into our budget over the last 7 years. I think we've seen the return on the investment, and so it's just one more piece of our budget that we budget for, and we're glad that we do. I'm very thankful that we have that and support to do it because it's really important, I believe.
One other issue that we discussed was possible complaints by other people that would be in the field of view of the camera, but not necessarily a subject of the police action. Has there been any complaints by those people in the background? Are they concerned that they're on film? Do they want to be blotted out in some way on the film? Have you heard any complaints from anybody?
Chief Keiske.
Madam Chair and Senator Limmer, actually, no, that hasn't been an issue with us that people have complained about being in the video, if that's what you're asking. It hasn't been a problem.
One of the selling points that the legislature was told when the departments wanted to implement body cameras was for transparency purposes. And I mean, we all know I lobbied hard to make more of this information public. And so in what regard, or to what extent, is the use of body cameras really helping your department or others that you've heard of to be transparent when only the cases where there's substantial bodily harm are made public?
Well, Madam Chair, that's a good question. Typically, our experience has been people that if they have a concern about officer conduct or the force that we've used or how we've handled the call, they are typically the subject of the data, so they can come in and we on a regular basis offer the opportunity to come in and review the video, and a lot of people take us up on it. And in that respect, it's been very helpful. It's people that have a concern about the situation have access to it if they were in the video. And there's been a few situations where they want access to a video and subjects in the video. We haven't been given consent, so we just simply redact them, and you can still see the individual who's concerned about a specific incident or call, if that makes sense to you.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for members? Oh. Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Chief, I said I was going to ask this of other law enforcement officers that came forward, but this technology, have you considered any potential disparate impacts as it applies to communities of color in how this technology is deployed? For example, do you have any concern that now we have more images of African Americans, far higher percentage than how they're represented in the population at large, and what kind of disparate impact that may have on the community as a whole?
Chief Geiske.
Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, that's a good question. I haven't given that a lot of consideration because we respond to the calls that we're dispatched to, and as far as engagement with the community in different contexts we have, it's a variety. So I can't say that I've necessarily thought of that. It's a good question. I'd have to give that some more thought and more research. But it's a good question. I don't really have a good answer for you at this time.
Well, Madam Chair,
Representative Lesh.
and thank you, Chief. I don't have a good answer for it either, how to resolve it. But I do know that based on case law, disparate impact and its effects are very real. Like the courts say, no, if the effect of you being treated differently, in other words, if we're collecting mass amounts of data against one population compared to, say, the white population, that is absolutely a legal issue. On the other hand, police are going to say, we don't pick, we respond to calls. What do you want us to do? Like shut off our camera when we see, a different race. So I'm not saying I have the answer to it, but I'm just saying, like, in the future, I think it's something that this committee is going to have to be dealing with, because I think the courts will deal with it. So thank you.
Chief Geiske, I had a couple other questions, and I'm going to ask this on a lot of these technologies that we're going to be talking about today. Does your department use body cameras that allow live streaming?
Currently, we do not.
Are you looking at that?
Madam Chair, at this time, no, we're not looking at that. I realize it's potentially available to us. It might be something we would consider in a tactical type of situation or a high-risk warrant using a SWAT team, something of that nature, but it's nothing we've discussed recently or that I have a immediate or believe that our department has a need for it at this time.
Okay, and facial recognition technology on the camera itself?
Madam Chair, I know one of the challenges I think we face, in Burnsville, I know many departments do as well, what's marketed in the technology that's available out there isn't something we can always keep up with. So even though it's available, we're not necessarily using it at this time. Quite frankly, sometimes we have enough challenges using the tools that we have and making sure we're using them to their capacity. So as they come out with new stuff, we review it if it makes sense. I know that there's a variety of software available, so we're cautious about what we use, and what we have now works, so we don't necessarily have a need, at least our department, based on the volume and the size of the requests and the videos that we have.
And I'm assuming this doesn't apply to you, but I understand there's technology out there that can remotely activate a body camera. Are you using that?
Madam Chair, that's a good question. Again, I think it changes so much. There's a variety of cameras out there now, and I can only speak to the product we use. When we started in 2010, there was one model. Now there's a variety of models, and I do believe some of those can be activated. when squad car lights are put on or remotely, but I can't speak specifically about it because our system currently does not use any of that.
Okay. And I read an article recently, and I think I had it put in members' packets, about one particular department. No, it's not St. Paul, but maybe it's Maple.
Looking at the Guardian article, Madam Chair?
I don't know. I don't think so. It's about a case study that one of the,
Washington County.
Washington County, thank you. Washington County, they deployed, they're using smartphone cameras. They gave all of their officers smartphones and are using the entire smartphone, I guess, to, obviously, they're turning the cameras on to be used as body cameras, but they're, as we all know, with smartphones, there's so many other capabilities that those phones have. And so, and I know this is not your your specific department, but I would have concerns with that. I would think that, are those officers leaving those phones at the department when they leave? Are they only allowed to use them during their shifts? I would think that it would be really easy to download that, any video from that onto to their own personal device. I just see, a lot of issues with that, and I don't know if you have any response to the use of that technology or not. I'll let you, I guess, comment if you have any.
Madam Chair, I'm not familiar with that particular model or that technology. I know it does exist. I would just say, like most departments, you need policy in place to address those issues of misuse. You and I have talked about this before. I added a special section to our policy just to reflect how clear that needs to be. And I would guess most other departments, whether it's Washington County or whatever, they're required to have a policy, and it better be a good policy that covers that. Because the misuse of any of this technology, we understand, can be devastating to the law enforcement profession and take us backwards, and we don't want that. So I think law enforcement executives are very aware of that, concerned about it, and try to put as many systems in place, policy, training, and oversight to avoid the concern that you have. But I understand the concern, and I can't sit here today and tell you I know everything about it, but I think it's a legitimate concern to have, and it's a very good question to ask. And I would imagine most police chiefs would be in a similar situation, have your things in a good, solid place to prevent that from happening. And if it does happen, then you need to deal with it.
Right. Any other member questions for the chief? Representative Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Chief, so back to the conversation regarding facial recognition technology. So you commented that you currently don't see you have a need for it or are even exploring the use of that in the future. But are you aware, has it been marketed to you as an option that's even available by the vendor at this time?
Chief Geiske.
Yep, Madam Chair, Representative. Yes, like I mentioned before, it's hard sometimes to keep up with all the changes. But yes, I'm aware it's available, that the product that are out there, whether it's a Taser or whatever company has it, I know it's out there at the time and it's being marketed. Again, down the road, we may look at it. At this time, we're currently not using it. Hopefully that answers the question.
Anyone else? Thank you very,
Madam Chair.
Senator Limmer.
Chief, in your answering these questions, you stated quite a few times that you knew of other new technologies, new optional versions of equipment. Legislators don't get forwarded that type of information. Do you have any resources that you could tell us about that would provide us that type of information?
Chief Geiske.
Madam Chair, Senator, a lot of my information comes through the mail that I don't even try to, don't ask for it, just they get your name on a mailing list. So a lot of it's I can't keep up with it. The internet mailings, there's a lot of magazines, periodicals, there's a lot of information available out there. I'm not a techie guy, I don't really track a lot of that, but I know it's out there and it's available to research.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate
Madam
it.
Chair, members.
Next up, Drew Evans. We're going to learn a little bit about future law enforcement technologies, which is kind of where we've where we're talking about right now, so.
Yeah.
Welcome to the commission. Please state your name for the record and go ahead with your presentation.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Drew Evans. I'm the current superintendent at the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. For this particular, I guess I'll just have a brief statement and then any questions that I can answer on behalf of the committee. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension is an organization composed of the Criminal Investigation Division at the BCA, our Minnesota Forensic Science Services, which is the statewide crime laboratory for the state of Minnesota, and then Minnesota Justice Information Systems, which houses a number of databases housing criminal history information for the state. Amongst those three divisions, our primary mission is really to serve our local law enforcement partners across the state of Minnesota through the 87 sheriffs and numerous police departments, about 432 law enforcement agencies. In addition, we provide those services to all the county attorneys across the state, public defenders, probation officers, the criminal justice system as a whole, and the court system. As part of that mission and role, we do utilize a number of technologies, and we are consistently examining new technologies as they come online to provide resources to those local jurisdictions that may not make sense to house in one jurisdiction, for example. So in other words, we had purchased technologies that make more sense for one organization to utilize on behalf of all those law enforcement across the state of Minnesota. As we've examined many of those in front of the respective committees that all of you sit on, every time we look at a new technology, we look for, to begin with, the usefulness for Minnesota law enforcement, whether or not that technology is matured to a point of being useful and can be supported on an ongoing basis. But then, most importantly, look at the current laws in the state of Minnesota to ensure that we're operating consistently with those laws and the constitutions of both the state of Minnesota and the United States. As I noted, we're a criminal investigative agency, and so if we fly in the face of the Constitution, or if we do something inappropriately or outside the bounds of the laws and the Constitution, we'll ultimately lose the criminal cases that we're pursuing. And so we are very careful before we implement any technologies to ensure that we're doing it in a legal way, that we can ensure that any use of that technology in our criminal investigations will ensure that that evidence comes into court and that that person, that evidence is admissible under the law. And so with that, I don't know if there were specifics for the committee that you wanted me to cover in terms of specific technologies, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
What do you see coming down the pike, Mr. Evans, as far as what would be useful in the state of Minnesota that would meet your criteria of also being constitutional for both federally and state, and in accordance with Minnesota law? What are you seeing coming down the pike that you think would be useful for the state of Minnesota?
So there's a number of technologies that we've discussed, in your committees as well, some of them including that we've discussed here before, and we don't possess them at the Department of Public Safety, but things like UAVs or unmanned aerial vehicles that various law enforcement agencies have deployed across the state of Minnesota. We can see usefulness in those in terms of searching for missing people. We can see usefulness in those for processing and taking photographs and video of crime scenes, for example. We have consistently been examining new technologies when it comes to technical exploitation of devices, meaning your phones. Many of you have probably heard about things like going dark. The FBI, for example, who started tracking this information last year, had approximately 12,000 mobile devices, of which about 6,000 of them they were unable to examine due to encryption. That creates a significant barrier for us in law enforcement in terms of any type of criminal investigation that we're doing. We need a search warrant to search your phone. So a judge often has, in those situations, authorized us to look at the mobile device as part of an ongoing criminal investigation, and due to the encryption that's on those phones or those mobile devices, we're unable to do that. And so there are companies that are constantly looking at ways to bypass that encryption, but that's another example of how, while we may be able to get technology as that matures, we need to ensure that that technology is being used in accordance with the Constitution, which is why we would get a search warrant to look at that phone. So those are a couple of examples of what we've looked at. The field of forensics is constantly evolving, that we're looking for areas that we can use new technologies to gain more information, for example, for DNA, or we look at things like different DNA processing techniques to get more information with less biological evidence.
Can you give us an example of what?
So one of the things that has been a discussion in the DNA field would be rapid DNA that can be processed in a much shorter time period. But I'll tell you, rapid DNA isn't new. It's been around for a number of years, but as I've noted, as we examine this, working with the vendors that are doing this, we will not deploy a technology until it's mature enough that we can rely on the results, that we can ensure that they will not be contaminated when they're being processed. There's a whole host of things that we look at when we're looking at those types of technologies.
Well, they use those on TV all the time.
Yes.
Because they get the DNA evidence the same day,
Yes, they do.
just hours later.
Which we would love, but we need to do it in an efficient and effective manner.
Yes, CSI, yeah, for sure. So talk to us a little bit about facial recognition technology. It's kind of a hot topic. And is it being used in the state of Minnesota?
Yeah, so I can only speak obviously on behalf of the BCA. The BCA is not utilizing facial recognition technology at this time. I think I noted the letter, or the article that was handed out in today's materials. The FBI does have next generation identification. They have some facial recognition built into it. However, in Minnesota, we do not provide the booking photographs in Minnesota at this time to the FBI, which has the capability under this new system to take Minnesota's booking photographs. And the facial recognition they offer as a tool, as you may know, the BCA is the conduit to the FBI systems. However, we do not have a tool in place right now to utilize their facial recognition technology. So if any law enforcement were to utilize that in Minnesota, they would need to work with the local FBI field office. And I don't know off the top of my head if any law enforcement has done that.
Okay. Representative Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we previously were talking about the ALPR, and as we heard, part of the driver for that was cars that are reported stolen, and several other examples. And so it allows for the capture of that to put those queries against known reportedly stolen vehicles, and then to retain it for 60 days to go back and query that retroactively. And then taking that driver then for ALPR, combining that with video, what are your thoughts from an investigative body for a driver similar to that, such that setting up stationary cameras at the Mall of America or anywhere else that are simply recording and combining the facial recognition technology that we're familiar that Facebook and others have obviously matured and developed, and then using that against reported missing persons, abducted people, or any other uses that might allow for benefits.
Mr. Evans.
I think, as you've noted in your legislation with the LPR, I think as it's outlined, I think that would be difficult to do in the scenario that you've outlined. In terms of facial recognition, I think it's a technology that's developing. I think that there's a difference between how a private entity such as Facebook would utilize facial recognition and then being developed and mature to a point where we in law enforcement can truly rely on those results to be or to be utilized in a criminal investigation. And so facial recognition is something, we continue to monitor. It's so difficult to, have that conversation, because I do think we have to have a very careful examination of things like facial recognition and how we implement it in our criminal investigations.
Representative Lucero.
Well, I fully agree that absolutely we need to be careful and very diligent in our potential future use or adoption of capabilities similar to that. But I know the day is going to come when somebody will propose the idea, think of the benefits that we could achieve by having stationary cameras and combining that with live stream that only law enforcement has access to, these video streams that take the videos that are captured, run them against a facial recognition technology, and I only use Facebook as an example. Obviously, it's a private entity, but we know that that technology is being developed by multiple entities. So that day's going to come, and as policymakers, we definitely need to be cognizant of that and prepared for that. And then on a different topic, it was, I think, last year or 2 years ago in the Public Safety Committee, and I don't have it right off my fingertips here, but there was we see these, the devices, whether it be Amazon and Google, have the technologies that are in the home and we can speak to audibly, and those are also recording then to some degree and capturing and retaining for even a short period of time. And then there was an investigation, a murder investigation, and that was used as evidence to take the information off of that was captured and the audio conversations that took place. As an investigative body, what do you think about that? Or have you heard of any uses of that here in Minnesota, potential?
Mr. Evans.
Madam Chair, Representative Lucero, I think the case you're referencing, I think it was out of Missouri, was Alexa or the Amazon that you as your assistant, and they were trying to get data off of that device that was held by Amazon or from Amazon from that device. I think that any device, if you look at it from that perspective, as long as it's done with proper court authorization, should be utilized as a tool in an investigation. I see that as no different than if you had a home video camera device in yours that was recording that, and we're conducting a criminal investigation, and a judge authorized us to look for evidence of that crime, that we would do that. So with the proper authorization, I think all these technologies should be examined in those cases.
Representative Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I agree absolutely to have the checks and balances of a court with a proper search warrant, et cetera, et cetera. But as we all are well aware, that there are plenty of examples of law enforcement, or not just law enforcement, but agents of the government going to the vendors directly and asking them to turn over the data that's being stored in their data centers in their cloud without even the knowledge necessarily of the customer. And so this stuff can happen on the back end. So again, as policymakers, we need to be cognizant that this is happening, but I fully agree. Hopefully that is occurring through properly executed search warrants, checks and balances, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, this technology continues to evolve, and we definitely need to be concerned.
Mr. Evans, I know you stated your criteria, would the technology be useful in Minnesota, is it constitutional in accordance with Minnesota law? And I wanted to pivot now to cell phone tower stimulators. And I believe it was 2014 or 15 when we passed the law here in the state of Minnesota requiring a tracking warrant. And one of the things I found interesting in my research for today was, and actually our new assistant, our new researcher for the commission, pointed me to federal law and the federal requirements for using these tracking devices. And it requires a search warrant, not a tracking warrant, not a court order, a full-blown search warrant. And so I'm wondering why we would have a lower standard than that in the state of Minnesota. And I don't remember all the discussions around that when the law passed, but maybe you can help me out.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, that was to bring us back to the discussion as to when this occurred and when this law was moving forward. There are some nuances when it comes to cell tracking technologies that didn't fit squarely within a search warrant. However, we do have the same standard of review, and so as we were working through this, and Mr. Diebel might remember some of this, that we had some discussions at the time about how we were to implement this in relation to our current search warrant statute in Minnesota. The idea was proposed by some to create this tracking warrant. However, it is the same standard of review as a search warrant, so we do comply with the federal law in Minnesota by having our tracking warrant on in statute. In addition, there's actually some additional requirements that would be outside of the requirements of a search warrant under our Minnesota statute in the tracking warrant language here for the unique nuances, I guess I would put it, that are associated with that type of technology.
So has the tracking warrant stood up in court, to your knowledge?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I don't know in terms of, I am not aware of it ever being challenged in a way that we have lost any evidence in a case. I'll put it from that perspective.
Okay, because I certainly don't want the bad guy getting away based on we had a tracking warrant versus a search warrant or something less than that. And I know there are some cases federally, and I know our researcher's going to go over some of the federal cases now regarding these cell phone simulator towers and devices. And I certainly want to make sure, I know one case is really a really bad guy it's like a serial rapist that got off because they didn't get a search warrant. So Representative Lesh, I know that last year, or actually the year before, it was brought to our attention because there's supposed to be, the courts are supposed to report to us how often these tracking warrants are obtained, and it's supposed to be made public after a period of time and be unsealed. And I know that there was some confusion over how the new law conflicts with a 1980, maybe a wiretap law or something like that. And Representative Lesh, I know you introduced some legislation last year after deadline that would address the problem there. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
I can speak to it a little bit, Madam Chair. When I first heard about the fact that none of these were released in direct contravention to what was clear legislative intent, I was perturbed, to say the least. But after conversations with several judges, as well as law enforcement folks, I learned that cops are just doing what cops usually do, which is throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, which is what I would do if I was a cop too, in terms of applications for the warrants, which means that when it comes before a judge, they're not in a position to disclose information related to our clear disclosure mandate when there's another provision under which the warrant was applied for that does not say it should be disclosed. So by default, the bench is, I guess, not following well, they're following the law, but it was probably our fault, Madam Chair, in just addressing the tracking warrant piece in the legislation without considering that, no, these warrants are applied for under everything, including catch-all provisions. So in order to address that with legislation, I also did speak with Ramsey County Chief Judge Guthman yesterday, who sends his regrets that he's not be able to be here to speak to it because he has an expungement calendar this afternoon, but is willing to have discussions with us and members of the committee in the future in terms of what the bench's needs are to meet with what our legislative intent is. And Madam Chair, that's going to require us being willing to make changes in some of the other warrant areas as well.
Mr. Evans, is that a conversation that you've had with the judiciary at all regarding those warrants and how we can make that fix?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I have not had that conversation with the bench. I will say that when we drafted our order, when we were creating it, it was never our intent for that provision to be utilized, that your intent to follow the notice provisions was built into our template that we use.
Thank you. Senator Limmer.
Madam Chair, thank you. Superintendent, some of the concerns, like I have mentioned before, about the lack of the legislature knowing what technology law enforcement has, was really predicated on the license plate reader coming into knowledge after it being used by the Minneapolis Police Department for 6 years. The legislature was unaware that there was even such an invention that could do that. And it was revealed by a savvy reporter at the Star Tribune that made the news story. And those of us in public policy making were rather surprised there was equipment like that. Would your agency be at all concerned if the legislature required a list of technological tools to be known to the legislature so we could consider making legislation governing the use of that equipment?
Mr. Evans?
Madam Chair, Senator Limbers, and members, as we've discussed on this particular issue, I think in broad categories, we have no concerns about talking about the various general capabilities that we have. We do continue to have concerns about the very specific capabilities of a particular technology or naming that particular technology. As we see, criminals can be very savvy and sophisticated, and as soon as we have a technology that they're aware of, they will take measures to subvert and avoid that particular technology, and so which renders it useless in some situations. So as we've discussed here, it really depends on what it is in terms of we've said we can track cell phones through this technology, but getting into the details of exactly how certain things work is what our concern is, and so it's a little bit of a sliding scale to answer your question.
Some of the ideas that I've heard, I don't know if they're true or not. I was in California a few years ago, and I was listening to the 10 o'clock news, and the news article talked about privacy advocates concerned about a particular law enforcement agency that was testing a tool that would be in a mobile unit, and they could determine by just pulling up alongside a car whether or not someone was texting or not. Useful for enforcement if it was in that particular state against the law. I've asked around in local agencies here in Minnesota. I have been told, at least the ones that I've spoken with, that no one knows about that technology here. Or the other technology that a police vehicle can pull up, whether it's a subvert vehicle or not, they can pull up, scan a building or a house and determine how many people are in the house and where they're located in that house, kind of like a giant X-ray machine. I don't know if those things are real or if they're fabled and it's all an urban legend, but the question is we in the legislature are concerned about that type of equipment without having any parameters or curbs on the use of it. And I guess I need to know from my position in the legislature, how would policymakers ever know if law enforcement doesn't reveal it? Because no one sends me those trade magazines regarding all of that equipment.
Mr. Evans?
Madam Chair and Senator Limmer, members, it's, it's so, the first question is how would you know about it if we don't tell you, and so I think that's an obvious answer, that if I don't tell you, you may not know the specific what it is. That doesn't mean there aren't protections in place. In this situation, as you discussed with the X-raying, I don't know the exact technology. There are technologies, heat, signature technologies that you can look through a home's walls. However, the United States Supreme Court has very clearly told us we need a search warrant to be able to do that in that situation. I'm not familiar with the other technology, as you noted, and I certainly understand the perspective of everybody here as policymakers wanting to make sure that you're putting guardrails from your perspective as policymakers in place. Our nature of public hearings and the way we operate does make it difficult for us to talk about some specific situations or technologies in a public setting other than talking about them in broad categories. I do think, as I said, the Constitution ensures that we have to comply with the Constitution and search warrant requirements of that, but as you've noted, sometimes changing technologies require us to pivot and move a different direction.
Yeah, Madam Chair,
Senator Limmer?
we're all at the victim of new technology, and it's leaping in quantum strides far ahead of us. And our goal is to balance that privacy right with common good. Usually, the bridge between those 2 points is due process and constitutional law. And so, again, it's just been a frustration of mine as a policymaker, trying to catch up to technology that, in some cases, a law enforcement agency might be using for 6 years, and we don't even know about it. So I'm just venting.
Well, we saw the same thing with Stingray and some other things, too, that, let me ask you this, Mr. Evans. Do you field questions, or does your department field questions from local agencies that are considering investing in certain technologies? Do they ever come to you for advice on whether they should purchase that and what they need to consider if they should purchase that kind of technology?
Madam Chair, members, certainly we have conversations if it's technology that we currently possess or it's something in that realm. There's certain areas that local law enforcement is ahead of us. The UAV, as I noted before, I mean, we don't possess them currently, but there's a number in the state that do. So it really depends on the technology.
Okay. Senator Newman.
Representative Lesh, I think you were describing a sort of a typical conflict of laws situation when you were speaking a few minutes ago. That is pretty well outlined in the letter from Jeffrey Shorba from the State Court Administrator's Office in a letter dated November 15th, 2016, addressed to the Senate and the Chief Clerk of the House of Representatives. And right on the top of page 3, Mr. Shorba states that warrants citing governing law are considered to be governed by all applicable statutes simultaneously, and then goes on to indicate that some of those applications for warrants are considered sealed, while others are considered, public and have to be disclosed. So my question, Representative Lesh, is in your discussions with concerning this issue when it came to light for you, because the rest of us, of course, were also unaware of it. Discussions with the courts of the judicial branch as to why did they decide to enforce the statute that required the documents to be sealed rather than abiding by the statute that required them to unseal them? That's the first question. Second question, you've got House File 2309, which I assume is going to be used for the purpose of addressing this problem. Have you had any discussions with the courts as to whether or not if 2309, for instance, is passed, will that solve the problem for them, and will they begin to unseal the warrants in accordance with the statute that requires that?
Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Newman. To answer your last question first, yes, I have had conversations. The chair, Chair Scott, called me the other day and asked where we were on this. I'm like, geez, I don't know. I forgot. The last time I talked to a judge on this was probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago. So it was a reminder to get on the stick again before session boots up again. It's a good question, Senator. Why did they pick and choose? The best answer that I have is I've never really known judges to be venturesome in interpreting statutes liberally when it comes to the legislature. They're extremely conservative unless we give them specific marching orders. And I think they also don't like to wade into something that could be perceived as potentially political, so they took the safe route and defaulted in favor of the status quo. I believe that a good judge could have made the decision to disclose and therefore set the status quo, whereby if it was an over disclosure, then folks would come in to say, well, we got to fix this. So I don't know why those decisions are made that way by the bench, but based on how I've seen them rule on things in the past, I guess it's typical, is what I would say. That's a good enough answer.
Senator Newman.
Madam Chair, I appreciate that, Representative Lesh, and I'm not in any way being critical of you. I'm simply using you as an opportunity for a sounding board because I'm not aware of the judicial branch being here. But very clearly, we did give the courts marching orders, and they chose not to follow those marching orders. And I just think that it's fair to be critical of the judicial branch for taking the tack that they did, without ever mentioning to us in the legislature that that is the route that they have decided to take, because clearly there was a conflict of laws, and it just seems to me they should have mentioned something to perhaps the chief author or the chairs of the appropriate committees in the legislature. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
Senator, or Representative Flesh?
If I could, thank you, Madam Chair and Senator. I know that I was not tracking what was going on until I think it was Tom Lydon over at Fox 9 sniffed around a year later and was like, hey, where's all the unsealed warrants? So I wasn't even kept track of it, but that's happened on some of this technology stuff as well. I guess what I would say is there are very few things I enjoy in this job more than correcting the Supreme Court. It's just so much fun when they do something and you say no, and then they're like, okay. And this is one of those areas I think where we can do that if everyone's on the same page. We can I think get some language that will work. I think I agree with you because at first blush I looked at it and I said, no, you know what our intent is, go with it. But they deferred. So I think we're on the same page, Senator.
And Senator Newman, I will say, I did meet with someone from the courts this past session on this issue. They brought it to me and said that these were their concerns, and so that's why we're, I know that Representative Flesh was, he wasn't the bill's author at the time. That was Representative Atkins, who is now gone on to be a county commissioner, but I knew Representative Lesh had followed this issue closely, so I asked him to kind of meet with the same group of folks from the judiciary and try to come up with solutions. So next on my list, Senator Schoen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to just give you a little information. You expressed some concern with my great friends at the Washington County Sheriff's Department. The tool that they're using is an iPhone, but it's an app. It's a specific program that actually uploads the video directly to a secure server, and then it's not available to the deputies on scene. They can't take it home, the video, and record it. They can make phone calls. It's actually a pretty good system. So it does meet the audits. It does all the things that we have asked of any department to do. So it's actually probably one of the more ingenious ways to do it, just simply because there are much that you can use it as a camera and put things into the case file as well too in a secure way. So can't be shared, that type of a thing until they log into this system. You could share a link to the county attorney maybe for a case review or something specific like that. But I mean, yes, it is on the leading edge, but it would be no different than the city of Burnsville sharing the information as well, because it goes from directly from a secure server. So those things are out there just to give background, not to editorialize or anything. And then Senator Limmer, I think, you should, when I was working in narcotics and violent crime, every drug dealer or bad guy thought they were being watched 24 hours a day. And about 1% of them were right. And I think the concept of it really sparked a thought. Some of your comments were, and you keep wanting people to tell you what they have. And sometimes we don't even know that it's that new or that odd. I know especially when it came out. I mean, license plate readers honestly wouldn't have been the thing to think about as all that dramatic, because we type license plate numbers into our computers all day long when we're at work to see if a car is stolen, if it, we get ATLs, that type of a thing. If I see a gray, I get an attempt to locate for a domestic abuse suspect or whatever that's driving a gray Hyundai or silver Hyundai Sonata. And all of a sudden, every car on the highway is a gray Hyundai Sonata, and so you're going to run the plates and see if they match. All of a sudden, you get a Ford Taurus plate on a gray Hyundai Sonata. That's going to spark your interest. But it's about planning for the future. And I know I want to make sure, I heard the superintendent say that we have equipment that can see through walls. Our FLIR can see the temperature of the walls, not necessarily through it. I would assume that there could be technology at some point, as someday we could pull up to a house. Let's be honest. I mean, I don't know how many years ago it was we thought it would be ridiculous we could have video phones, right? We're going to see somebody on the other end of the phone. Now we can do everything right here. So I guess at this point, if you're seeing some weird article, I mean, we should probably think about what you would want to do to address that to be ahead of time. Synthetic drugs. We had to stop looking at the specific drug that was coming up every time and saying, in a broad sense, what are we going to do? So if the legislature, whether I'm in agreement or not, says this is what we need to do in a broad sense, if we don't want law enforcement or the government to be able to pull up to a house and scan the house to see who's in there under any circumstance with any tool, unless it's exigent circumstances or a warrant, then that's the direction we probably got to look at, rather than saying, Superintendent, what are all the new fun gadgets you have? I mean, that may come up, and it's probably worthy of discussion about how that may be, just for the future of how we look at things. But we're probably time to get back and watch some Jetsons episodes, and I mean, let's be honest, things have changed. And that's the direction we got to maybe look at, is what are we going to do in the broad sense, instead of trying to say every single piece of technology that changes, we have to have legislation about that technology. We have to have a broad sense and give direction so that departments can, budget, can understand what the concept is, and then if it's a warranted system, warrant-based need, then we can also tailor the technology around how that would work, right, to make sure that it does meet the guidelines, rather than us say, here's the new technology, now write the warrant. I mean, it goes half a dozen on one hand and 6 in the other, I suppose, in certain circumstances. But does that, I'm just kind of conceptualizing that I think maybe we're putting ourselves behind the 8 ball every time because we're not pushing ahead far enough, if that's the direction. Just like trying to look at it in a broader spectrum rather than piece by piece. I'm not saying that we shouldn't know certain things aren't out there, but maybe sometimes the how is another discussion as well, too.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Schoen, going back to the license plate reader, before we knew that there was equipment like that, police departments were collecting data not only on subjects that they were focused on, but tens of thousands of citizens' travel habits. And in addition to that, some of these agencies were selling that material about the whereabouts of citizens. Those citizens they weren't under suspicion, they weren't considered criminals, they weren't considered people that we should keep an eye on. And somehow, I personally believe that's none of government's business. They shouldn't have to follow us where we go, or if we run through a particular scanner of some sort, it's recorded day after day. I hope I don't live in a world like that, but I'm afraid we will be entering that if we haven't already. And so I'm not concerned about the bad guy out there and law enforcement going after them. I'm concerned about protecting a semblance of privacy that every citizen should expect, and that their travel habits shouldn't be sold to the highest bidder by government. And so as we examine the technological advancements of our age and where it may be going, I'm a little concerned about that. And I think we all should be. And that's why we have a Data Practices Commission. It's not to beat up on law enforcement. We're just trying to get ahead of it so we know if our citizens are going to be subject to some type of observation and recording of that observation, and then perhaps sold to the highest bidder, or intimate details, perhaps on a real ID card that might be accumulated every time we make a purchase. Those decisions are now out of our hands. They're now in the hands of Homeland Security Director. And at his whim, he can expand that at any time. I'm concerned about those things. And so that's why we created this Data Practice Commission, because our legislative committees are oftentimes so, our dockets are so full that we don't have time to get ahead of it and have discussions like this. So I appreciate your perspective on it, because we do want to make sure we go after bad guys that intend harm on our citizens. But at the very same time, the role of government is to protect those citizens. And I hope we as a government are part and parcel as a tool going in the opposite direction when it comes to their whereabouts, their buying habits, anything else.
Senator Schoen?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And Senator Limmer, I'm not sure if you took that I was taking umbrage with what you're saying. That's not the case. My point was, we've made a discovery that the agencies were selling data to private businesses to track people and their buying habits. I agree. I don't think that that's okay. I just think that once we find that specific type of thing out, then we should include that in all forms of government data, meaning I don't care if you have facial recognition and it's going to be used somewhere, you can't sell it. You can't, that's a broad spectrum thing, saying you can get in a big swath saying don't sell it, right? Whatever the data is, if that's the case. Same thing goes with whatever it may be. You can't sell the data if all of a sudden we can see through your house walls, or if we can hear through your house walls with technology from a squad car or whatever that may be. Someday, if that's 50 years from now, then I think we could actually talk about those things and ensuring that that would be anything that would be discoverable in that fashion through the use of technology that is not in the curtilage but inside a private person's home should be a warrant. If that's the way we have to do it, it doesn't. Then we're not stuck behind waiting to find out what the technology is. Does that make sense? I didn't sit here and try to make you sound like or feel like you were wrong. I may not agree upon every little detail, but I tend to agree more than I did 5 years ago on certain things, just from a perspective. I'm just trying to say, how can we do this so we're not beating our heads on the wall about every device that comes out?
And Senator Schoen, we've tried to do that in some of the recent legislation where we've put audit language in all of it. We've tried to have some consistencies in the policies going forward so that law enforcement knows what to expect and the people know what to expect. So we are trying to do that to a certain extent, and that's one of the reasons we have this commission, is so that we don't have to address each technology separately. There may be some that we will have to, but as a general rule, you're right. We need to say this is what we expect out of each. This is what the data classification is going to be. This is how long you can keep, non-hit data, all those things, and make it consistent from one technology to the other. Next, I have Senator Kent and then Representative Lesch.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this was exactly what I had wanted to talk about. I think we've seen a lot of threads sort of knitting together in the various conversations we've had today that bring up these exact points. Technology, it is big business to change that, as quickly as we should be changing our socks, right? It's just, that's the way that world goes. And then, hearing Chief Geisky talking about the experience, and I think we've all seen it in our own different lives, you get the ads, people are marketing them to you. There's always pressure to go out and buy the new thing with the newest bells and whistles for all these different reasons. So that is a gravitational pull that's going to continue happening. But back to the LPR story, it's important to remember, moving into yet another chapter of it, that part of the problem, because a law enforcement agency was collecting that data for 6 years, and the nature of Minnesota law was that data was public. And so, for whatever reason, whether the agency did not connect those dots that they were collecting all this data that stayed public, or that they just didn't think that really mattered, that's what was happening. And so, without going into the weeds of that lovely history that we all pretty well remember, there were administrative decisions made to try to keep that data private so that we could have the time to make some decisions, but that was a challenge. We almost didn't do it. And so, I agree with Senator Schoen completely. Ideally, we figure out some ways to broad stroke some of these principles, but I'm still concerned that because of the nature of Minnesota law, that we have to specifically go in and designate things to not be public, that when something comes up that doesn't fit existing laws, and by definition that's what new technologies do, that's where the challenges come in. And my bigger question, and I don't want to put Mr. Evans on the spot here, but this is something we need to keep talking about, is what can we do to create that safety net so that one of 432 agencies around this state has some bright idea to buy something that they were marketed, that they remember to connect those dots and remember the obligations according to current general law that they need to step up to. So I don't have an answer today, but this is, a hugely important conversation. Senator Limmer, I've supported you on trying to get into this direction, and I will continue to do so. Not that we want to let bad guys go, but, there are some serious ramifications that I think we've seen enough of a track record that agencies just sometimes miss the significance of it, and we've got to stay on top of it.
Thank you. Representative Lesch.
Well, thank you, and my original comment was related to something Senator Schoen said, but in light of Senator Kent's comments, I agree with you, and I actually think that the way that the Data Practices Act was first conceived of in the mid-'70s benefits us now, if only for the reason that yeah, having to, agencies, if they do buy a new toy, really kind of, it's on them, because they know this stuff's going to be designated public. I mean, this is what happened with LPR when admin gave it a temporary classification because the Star Tribune was seeing where Mayor Ryback was driving around town, which is kind of funny. But and then some repo man was able to track down a car and then ambush the car when the guy went into work at the car, which is also kind of funny. But government isn't really in the business of helping people do that kind of thing either. But yeah, it does put the onus on them to come forward to us and get a classification. So I agree with you. My question related, Madam Chair, to something that Senator Schoen brought up. When I used to do ride-alongs, there were 4 basic things that when you're tooling wrong, write down on your notepad a license plate, and you'd key it in, and you're looking for 4 things, essentially. Did the registered owner have a warrant? Did the registered owner have a license that was canceled, revoked, or suspended, or whatever? Was the car reported stolen? And then the 4th thing that you could do, that you always did, which from what I understand of the current state of technology, you cannot do with LPR, was if the plate was on the wrong car, like what Senator Schoen brought up. But it would seem to me, based on some other discussions today, that with the advent of facial recognition, like I could take a panoramic view, my camera of this room, and post it on Facebook, and Facebook would ask me if like 10 of these people, if that's Dan Schoen, if that's Senator Kent, So if you can do that, I would think that we'd be able to do that with LPR, but maybe Mr. Evans would know. Is that something that we still can't do? I think I heard that's something we can't do, or is that something that's on the next, is that something that can be solved with a software fix, or would that require a whole new set of hardware to accomplish that?
Mr. Evans?
Madam Chair, Representative Lesch, and members, I can walk through exactly what we can do, and I think the scenario you're talking about is when there's a stolen license plate. We obviously can't compare the license plate to the VIN on the car specifically, but we do have the ability in our hot file. And what the BCA does is pushes out to the agencies twice a day what we consider hot files, and what it gives you is stolen vehicles, stolen license plate, wanted persons, certain similar information from Canada, protection orders, missing persons, violent gang and terrorist organization information, supervised release, convicted sexual offender registry. These are FBI hot files that I'm walking through right now. And then violations of immigration status, but violators. There's also a COPS alert, which is a Minnesota-only alert. It's called COPS, standing for KOPS, keeping our police safe. If somebody is a danger to our police officers, or that information needs to go out from there. Minnesota warrants, suspended driver's licenses, revoked driver's licenses, canceled driver's licenses, and disqualified driver's licenses. So they're canceled driver's licenses are there. Those are the files that go out right now. So I think what you were describing in terms of the plate that doesn't belong on the car, if it's reported as a stolen plate, then they would get that hit.
Representative Lesch.
Well, and that relates to my question, because I mean, if a plate that belongs on a silver Sonata you see on a Ford F-150, I mean, the average cop would seize that. I mean, that's still reasonable suspicion, if not probable cause to pull over. But what you're telling me, I think, is that that's not going to be relevant under the current list that you keep, is that right?
Right, and Madam Chair, and I would defer to, my colleagues that utilize these specifically, but your scenario, we're only giving the file that goes to them as the stolen plate. It wouldn't do the comparison that you're discussing.
Okay, and Madam Chair, if I could, he brought something up that, asked, I guess, spurred another question from me. How do you get on the COPS list, the KOPS? How does one get on that?
Mr. Evans?
Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, that is entered by the local jurisdiction, so in their limited scope for how long they remain active, and it is in Minnesota only. So if somebody assaulted a police officer, for example, and they had fled the scene, the Cottage Grove Police Department could enter in that information. It would be in our system that they were looking for them to, as a person of interest in that example, and to keep our police officers safe. It was designed as an officer safety mechanism for our law enforcement to get information quickly out into the field from Minnesota only.
Okay, well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to have to think about that a little bit more because it gives rise to other PC questions, but I'll mull over that a little bit more. Thank you.
Senator Schoen?
It's all good. Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, so your statement, I mean, if that's a concern long-term, I don't know why if we're going to have a broad spectrum of issues, that would be one of those things that I would look at and say, if you're concerned, and if you have concerns about recognizing car color or whatever that may be, then let's have the discussion, and instead of having that when it comes. I mean, I don't know why we wouldn't believe that if it's not today, that it won't be at some point in time, be able to do that, right? And so, I mean, that's kind of what my point was to Senator Limmer, is broad overview, let's think about the future instead of waiting. But I don't know what, I mean, I'd look for what your concern is, or what.
Representative Lesh?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Schoen. It wasn't really a concern. It was more, why can't we do that? I mean, I would think with the technology we'd be able to do that. So I wasn't raising a concern about that. I mean, if you can do that with the technology, you can do it. It was more, it seems kind of weird that we wouldn't be able to do that with how fast the technology is moving. So it was more just an inquiry out of curiosity than any concern.
Mr. Evans?
Madam Chair, and I just want to address one for Representative Lesh on this, and we certainly can have more discussions about COPS alerts, but if there is anything, the reference to probable cause, that information will be typed right into that alert. It's a mechanism to share information quickly with jurisdictions. As you know, the Twin Cities has a lot of jurisdictions here to get that information out quickly, but it will say right in there, there's probable cause to stop this person, for example, or this is not probable cause to stop this person if it's informational only. So they do address some of those concerns in that information. It's designed as an informational bulletin.
Representative Lesh?
Madam Chair, I guess the reason I bring it up is I had a client who has had kind of an attitude, and it's a smaller town where he's from. And one time the cops came to do a knock and talk, and he slammed the door in their face, and he got on a list of assaultive to cops. And, I'm just wondering, I'm willing to bet he's probably on that list because he offended the cop. And also, he's got an attitude in town, so the other cops in town don't like him either. But there's nothing major about the guy. And so it caused me to think, I wonder if he's on that list, and if so, what's the line of what it takes to get on that list, and what it takes to get off, and where does that road lead? It was more just, there's not a specific question for you right now, Superintendent, but I'm just thinking about it as all.
Madam Chair, that actually,
Senator Schoen?
and maybe Superintendent, you were going to address this. So if I'm wrong, you let me know. I put stuff on this. This is what you would consider the BOLO, be on the lookout, or attempt to locate. It's not a list of, hey, this dude's bad, so just remember. Sounds like your client, at whatever they decided to charge an assault case, and then said, if you happen to see this car, he might have been on there for 72 hours. There's an expiration date many times in many of these cases where the information, once you run the plate after 72 hours, you may have to re-up this. Now, I mean, for instance, if we get a call that somebody's family member is suicidal, and we have details about that family member, where they may be, what kind of vehicle they're in, what clothes they were wearing, we'll put that information out on a cops alert as an attempt to locate, check the welfare of an individual to make sure that they're okay. If there is, I mean, many times they'll see something come up about an armed robbery that was in a community in the metro area, and they'll give details about the suspect, if there was a vehicle seen, that type of thing, and that may last for 48 to 72 hours. So it's not a repository of permanent information, because the information, as far as like the alert, will go away after so long. So now if you want to, your local agency, wherever he was, may have a designation in their record system that designates them as a violent offender or offender that has some history with them. That may be different, but not in this system.
All right, thank you. Mr. Evans, thank you. Stick around in case there's further questions later, if you would, please. Our researcher has prepared some remarks for us regarding the subject matter. So, Maren.
Madam Chair, thank you. My name, for the record, is Maren Bartle. I'm the research assistant for the Legislative Commission on Data Practices. I was asked to compile some information regarding advancing law enforcement technology and how that technology is morphing together and any lawsuits resulting from that technology. A lot of the things I'll probably discuss have already been discussed today, and I'll hope to elaborate on them as best as possible. So I guess starting out, I'll just start with body cameras. Obviously, one of the purposes for body cameras is the transparency in law enforcement. It's promising to hear policies like the one for internal auditing used at Burnsville. Currently, a case pending in San Diego is alleging that law enforcement turned off their body camera as soon as they became physical with a veteran suffering with PTSD and depression. And that case has now gone forward because of the absence of body camera. So I think it is important to remain transparent.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Are we supposed
Mr. Schoen.
Are we supposed to have a document to follow along here, or is this, are you just?
This is my own research, and I believe Sally did or is planning on making this available for everyone. It does have embedded links in it, so you'll be able to follow articles. But beyond that, moving forward with body cameras as they're advancing, we have obviously discussed today live stream video, which is video that's live streamed from the body cam to the police headquarters. This allows for remote activation, cloud-based storage. And I guess the concerns that alerted me about this were the remote activation. There's instances where police are interviewing victims, suspects, and the consent from those victims or suspects are that they've allowed them to come into their home to interview them, but that they do not want the body camera on. With the remote activation, somebody from the police headquarters, it's my understanding, would be able to turn on that body camera without necessarily the officer in the room's knowledge of that. So it raises some search and consent issues. And then with the cloud-based storage, this was a topic that our chairperson presented with the security of the storage systems. I'm not certain on each department's security, so I suppose that would be a better question for departments separately. And then beyond that, we have smartphone body cameras as well, which was mentioned in reference to Washington County. And the reason why Washington County was mentioned was because I came across a case study with a smartphone body camera company called Visual Labs, in which they worked with Washington County to initiate their body camera program. And I believe initially they were using Kyocera phones. I may be wrong on that. I don't have the study in front of me, but again, there's a link to it here. So if Senator Schoen now believes that they're using an app, that does change the circumstances a bit. Our concern with smartphone cameras would be whether they're owned by departments, whether they're owned personally by officers. If they're owned personally by officers, it creates an issue when people are requesting information, as that was brought up at last week's meeting as being an issue for officers to go through and separate personal versus professional or workplace data. And then furthermore about the issues, potential issues, I should say, with the cloud-based storage is, it's my understanding that cloud-based storage allows videos to immediately go to the cloud, and so they can't be edited. Our questions were whether they are able to be edited, because I guess one of the benefits of cloud-based storage is that they can't be edited. So we'd be losing that benefit if officers are able to edit those videos after they do go into the cloud. And then moving on from there, I guess, unless anybody has any questions about the body cameras, that's everything that I've collected on body cameras specifically. Body cameras also, of course, tie into facial recognition software, which I can touch on next if anybody has any questions.
Senator Schoen.
Madam Chair, and to staff, you mentioned being able to edit the videos. I mean, what is it in particular that you're discussing? Are you talking, I mean, are we talking about washing out faces, or are you trying to say manipulation of the video for facts?
Both. I think both would be a concern. The washing out faces, there is technology now that makes that much easier, but of course that would be an issue of hiring somebody to do that. And then beyond that, the misuse of body cameras, the editing, deleting portions, because the benefit of the cloud would be that live streaming in the cloud would be that the entire interaction goes up to the cloud. You shouldn't have as many technical errors with storage. And so that's incredibly beneficial for the transparency. And so I guess the issue would become, if it is editable, then you're losing that benefit, and potentially, not that is happening, but in circumstances like the case in San Diego that I presented, if that had gone up to a cloud and couldn't have been edited, there would have been information there and the lawsuit might not be proceeding.
Senator Schoen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I might have missed this. Was this about a phone that someone was recording on and edited, or was it for background, irrespective, whatever system any agency is using for their squad cars and/or body cameras, actually it tracks everything. Mm-hmm. Anybody who logs onto the system, what they do, whether they share it, view it, record it, or otherwise. But it is, I mean, I don't know how you would edit it at this point without the system acknowledging that somebody did try to tamper with it. And in fact, I don't know that it can be. But, I mean, maybe you have other information, and
We're just, excuse me, Madam
I
Chair.
haven't heard of this.
We're just considering the possibilities moving forward and what security measures are going to be in place. Is it going to be a login that an officer has to use in order to edit a video? The case that I was discussing was not involving any sort of cloud-based storage. It was what's now kind of old school body cameras, and the officer was able to just turn it off as soon as the interaction started escalating. And that's through other testimony in the San Diego case has been proven that it seems as though the officers did intentionally turn off the body camera. So that's what I'm saying, why the cloud-based storage would be a benefit, but there is a concern that moving forward there are security measures in place to ensure you can't edit it without anyone's knowledge of it being edited.
Okay, Madam Chair, just to clarify, so then the concern was about turning it off, not actually going into a computer system and taking out a slice of the video, or?
I think what she's covering is a broad spectrum, and it could be both.
Well, I mean,
Either or both. I
so-
mean, she's just saying what is out there that we need to have on our radar.
Okay, Madam
as
Chair,
far
I'll let it go. I guess,
Yeah.
I just get concerned because, I mean, these are systems that we have in place simply because, I mean, just case law alone. I mean, if you came in with what looked like a edited video, I mean, you can kiss your whole case goodbye, right? I mean, so, I mean, we just don't have the ability, nor should we, and nor do we have the desire.
And that's good to
Yeah.
know, that technology that the systems are tight enough that it would never allow that. But this may be an old school piece that,
Madam Chair, yeah,
It's different.
this, like I said, this particular case is not concerning cloud-based storage. It's actually making an argument for cloud-based storage. But then moving forward, if departments are going to be using cloud-based storage, the concern would be what are the security on it? And I am not aware of what security measures. You, Senator Schoen, would be much more aware of that. So it's just a issue moving forward, nothing that I'm currently concerned about, as it seems like this is new technology relatively, using live streaming and cloud-based storage. Unless there's any more questions on body cameras, I can move on to facial recognition technology.
Sure, go ahead.
So obviously, we've touched today on facial recognition technology and the fact that that's sometimes in real time, or officers walking up to people they've stopped, for example, in a traffic stop, and asking them to take a picture. There is a case of, again, in San Diego, where an officer walked up to somebody he had stopped in a traffic stop and told him he had to take his picture to verify he didn't have any warrants out against him. Since then, their policies changed, so it's a concern moving forward if it does not sound like there's facial recognition being used currently by law enforcement in this way, but moving forward, if it is going to be used, that consent is gained by the person they're seeking to take a picture of. The other concern is the real-time facial recognition, meaning that on a police officer's body camera, they would be walking through a public space in their job as a law enforcement officer, and it would be recognizing people's faces within that public area and sending alerts back to headquarters saying the person you just passed 20 feet ago has an active warrant. And so it's redefining public spaces and compromising privacy in the public sphere. As of March 2017, facial recognition technology is not being controlled by law. I don't know if any of the current legislation has gone through. I assume not, but there was pending legislation in Alaska, Connecticut, Montana, and New Hampshire that would regulate the use of facial recognition technology. The other concern with facial recognition technology is the databases that create the facial recognition technology software. So your face would have to be compared to a database to know if you have a warrant or who you are to identify you. Those databases by the FBI are being created using state driver's license IDs in addition to mugshots. And so the issue with that is if the state is giving their driver's license photos to the FBI, there's people who have no criminal history in this database, and I guess it raises an issue about when the FBI, if they do release this database to state agencies, how those will be used. Minnesota is not, just to clarify, Minnesota is not a state that's submitting driver's licenses to the FBI. So, but regardless of that, if the FBI releases their database to other state agencies, then there will be law-abiding citizens who have no criminal history in this database, and I guess that raises concerns for future criminal investigations. Say that their information pops up for a recent robbery, and there is somebody who has no criminal history is alerted that they match this profile, and so they're brought in, and perhaps they don't have an alibi or something, strange circumstances happen, and that therefore they're charged with or in part to this robbery. Well, that creates obviously issues, considering that otherwise they would have never been in a database because they don't have their fingerprints on file. This is an issue in particular because of the facial recognition technology's accuracy rate. There's a error rate, it's been reported between 15 and 20%. The New York Times state that the error rate is 20%. The Guardian article that I believe is in our packets here has the error rate at 15%, obviously making that problematic. And I think that's everything I want to touch on for facial recognition technology.
Sure, go for it.
Okay. And then today we didn't discuss in too much detail the cell phone tracking technology. We discussed it last week. Of course, this is in reference to Stingray and cell site simulators. The issue with that is that the cell site simulators are gaining information from people who are not under investigation, or they have the ability to. Whether law enforcement is doing that is department policy, and so that's just a concern about about, I guess, the privacy of every person, whether or not they're under investigation. The ACLU has counted that there's 72 cell site simulators that they're used in 24 states, and Minnesota is one of those 24 states, as we know from last week's meeting. Minnesota's not one of them, but there are states that have non-disclosure agreements with the FBI in which they agree to not discuss the use of Stingray technology. And of course, that raises the problem of transparency that we're having, or which is why we're having these meetings. And so if there is a non-disclosure agreement with the FBI for the use of Stingray technology, then we wouldn't be able to discuss each department's operations and policies concerning cell phone technology. I guess, and I believe Madam Chair was discussing earlier the Prince Jones case, which she had concerns with. It's a case out of Washington, D.C., in which the defendant was arranging to meet women through Backpages.com. He then stole several women's cell phones, and police then used those, a cell site simulator, either Stingray or another one, to obtain the defendant's phone number and then tracked him using his phone. The issue being that there was no consent to track him and a warrant wasn't obtained. Of course, this isn't an issue as long as a valid warrant is obtained, but his case ended up being thrown out because of this on appeal, and therefore we have somebody who was charged with rape and robbery and who is walking the streets because of somebody not doing their due diligence to get a warrant. Obviously, it doesn't sound like that's an issue here, and so it's just something that came on our radar through this research. As far as automatic license plate readers, the only thing I have to elaborate on from what was discussed today is Madam Chair had discussed the possibility of there being 360 degrees visibility from those ALPRs, and using facial recognition software through those license plate readers. And it doesn't appear that they're used in Minnesota. And of course, a lot of this information is coming from websites that are marketing to law enforcement. And that's not to say that any department in Minnesota has these technologies, but specifically the one that Madam Chair was discussing was the Eakin Red Eagle. It's their most advanced system that they have for license plate readers. And I believe the police chief from Bloomington said that they don't possess that, and it doesn't appear after the superintendent's comments that anyone in Minnesota would be possessing that technology. But moving forward, that is a concern, as it appears that license plate readers are combining technology with facial recognition and body cameras with their ability to record 360 degrees. It almost appears as though nothing around them would be free from view. Those are pretty much, as far as what everyone discussed today and some of the issues at the forefront, that's pretty much it. I can touch on the other technology if you'd like me to, Madam Chair.
If you just want to mention some of the things that
Sure.
could be on the horizon that you should look out for.
There's gunshot detection location services, which are microphones embedded throughout cities to detect and triangulate the location of gunshots, and then alert and send police to the scene. This raises evidentiary issues at trial and whether those conversations captured by the microphones are private or not. And there are a few cases on that. But I won't get into the details of that. They also have the ability with the microphones to be remotely activated, again, raising some of the same issues as the remote activation for body cams. And then one that we did discuss, I guess, a bit today was X-ray technology, which, although it seemed people weren't thinking that it was actually a possibility, there are cases in New York currently regarding the New York Police Department's use of X-ray vans. And so these vans are obviously mobile, and they move throughout the city, and they'll stop in areas in which they're investigating and I guess apparently have X-ray abilities, and they can detect explosives, drugs, and other materials, is what it says. And so a case brought by the New York Civil Liberties Union against the New York City Police Department resulted in, they were requesting information regarding how those vans are deployed, when, where, and their capabilities, and safety and health concerns with X-ray radiation. After that case, they were only able to retain records regarding the health and safety concerns of X-ray radiation. So that is, the court was not agreeing to let them have information regarding how and when the X-ray vans were being used. So there is little to no information on the X-ray vans use. Beyond that, there is technology in the works. It's by a company called Mini-Z, or that is the product's name. And that's a handheld X-ray machine, and they are currently in the process of potentially creating X-ray glasses. Apparently, they're struggling to find a way to make X-ray tubes small enough to fit into X-ray glasses. Of course, this would make it really difficult, if not impossible, to know when an officer is actually performing an X-ray search if they're on their glasses. Also concerning would be the use of drones, which isn't a new topic, but the weaponization of drones and robots kind of gained some attention at a Black Lives Matter protest in Dallas, in which the officers responding operated a drone or a robot with a bomb on it to essentially take down the shooter. This creates use of force issues, which I won't get into today. I'll happily give this to everyone else. I'm sure you guys don't need to hear me talk about use of force issues. There is legislation in several states, though, on the banning of weaponization of drones, which is also in here for everyone. And I think, that pretty much is everything you want to hear today, if not more than you probably wanted to hear today.
Thank you so much. Any member questions for our new staff? Thank you for that extensive look into what's out there, and I think the X-ray glasses would have several downsides.
Madam Chair,
Senator Limmer.
those X-ray glasses have been in advertisements in the back of comic books for decades.
Oh, goodness. Well, I think what we'll do now is move on to public testimony. And Mr. Webster, we'll have you go first, and then followed by Mr. Feist. Welcome to the commission, and please state your name for the record and go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the commission. My name is Tony Webster. I was here last week. I'm a researcher and a journalist. You do have some handouts that are being passed out to you right now, and I do have extras here as well. I mainly wanted to talk about some things I found regarding license plate readers, mainly regarding the sufficiency of the audit process. The first page in your handout is, it's a single page. This is the Duluth Police Department's entire audit is one page. This was a comment that was brought up earlier regarding some departments having longer, sort of detailed audits and others not. And sometimes there's a summary and sometimes there's more detailed. I asked the police chief directly, this is the entire thing for Duluth. You'll note number 4 here says that ALPR data is retained for 90 days. Which is not what the law says. The law says 60 days. On page 3, I've put an asterisk there, it's clearly 60 days. So I'm kind of concerned about how something like that could be missed. On page 2 is iPad's basically response to that, accepting that audit and saying there are no compliance issues after they reviewed it. So I'm a little bit concerned as to how something so clear as 60 versus 90 days could be missed. I do think more detailed audits would be really helpful. On page 6 is a data request that I sent to every law enforcement agency in the state last year who I knew to be using license plate readers. It was a pretty simple request. I asked for their log of use, which is defined by statute, and their written procedures. Both of those, law enforcement's obligated to have already prepared, so this really should have been a pretty straightforward request. Some agencies really did do a good job and got me the information quickly. Others, it was a little bit more complex to get it. Duluth I had a lot of back and forth with because they said, this is too big for email. We have to print out a ream of paper, mail it to you, make you pay for that. They weren't entirely clear on what log of use meant. Eventually, they said, it's too big for email. We'll put it on a DVD, mail it to you, charge you $18. And so I did that. Page 7 is just one page out of this this file that they sent me. I want to note that I redacted the license plate number here. This is after this law took effect, making license plate numbers not public. Duluth sent me their entire database without any redactions on license plate numbers, timestamps, geographical locations. They just sent this to me in the mail. I had some concerns with that. You'll see on the next page, page 8 through 10, I sent a letter to the Commissioner of Administration asking them to conduct an audit. That's something the statute allows them to do themselves, or to order an audit. I expressed some of my concerns. I included a copy of the data and all the correspondence between me and the city. I noted a couple other concerns as well. On page 11 is IPAD's response to me. They said they will not order an independent audit. And one of the things that I had asked for was that this be considered a breach. They sent this database of 7,000 reads of license plates just to me. I'm not entitled to get that data. That sounds like a breach to me. IPAD determined it's okay because I do not have a non-governmental purpose for the data. So basically they're saying it's okay that Duluth just sent this data out because I'm not a bad guy. Well, Duluth doesn't know that. I think each person who had their data just handed to me might have a potential claim against the city. I was really concerned that no one really bothered to look into this more, and that they were just kind of allowed to continue on without any oversight. I then reached back out to Duluth and I asked, okay, you gave me the wrong stuff. Can I get the right stuff now? They said it's still, again, too big for email. We'll mail you a new disc, but we won't charge you for it. I said, great. They did mail me a disc. It was a couple megabytes, not too big for email. And they did it again. They sent me an Excel spreadsheet that included a log of every license plate that was scanned, but they hid the column of license plate number. Now, they did not delete the column. They just hid it from view, so the data was still there. So twice now they've sent me a database of every single license plate that's been scanned. So I have some concern with that process. I have some concern that, something so clear, 90 versus 60 days just gets accepted as being compliant with the statute. So I think there is maybe some room for improving the audit requirement. I also want to note on the last page, page 12, this is just another sampling of one page. These are hits, so the previous page was reads, so the reads are people not wanted for any crime. The hits are when a license plate reader sees a plate that's on a hot list. In this example, you'll see the date of the report is in mid-February of 2016. Some of these hits are from about 4 more months prior. Now, if it's an active investigation, law enforcement is entitled to retain that information, but if it's not active, they cannot retain that data. This is just a sampling, but you can see what hot list some of these hits were from, whether they be suspended, canceled, revoked driver's licenses, stolen vehicles. Now, my understanding is that if an officer does not stop someone immediately who they suspect has a suspended driver's license, that's the end of the case. They don't really know who was driving the vehicle. If they figure it out, 2 weeks later, that's kind of the end of the case. There is no investigation. What I've seen here in Duluth and really across the state is that once a hit is captured, that data just stays there indefinitely. And sometimes it's really not an active investigation. One thing caught my eye in this list, which is MN parking tow list. That's essentially a scofflaw list of people who have a certain number of outstanding unpaid tickets. That's not something that statute specifically says is okay. The statute does give law enforcement permission to kind of make their own lists, but it's clear on what that is, and it kind of revolves around active investigations. So I'm not entirely clear if they're entitled to do that. I think that could use some clarity. And certainly the fact that they're retaining this information indefinitely is a bit of a concern. That's kind of all I wanted to say about license plate readers. You know, I think it's really good that we do have a statute that has an audit requirement, but you know, as we talk about technologies like facial recognition, you know, as I testified last week, this is technology that's been in use for almost 5 years at the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office. It's not something that's, you know, coming in the future. It might expand in the future, but it is here now, and there's nothing in statute that regulates it. When we have log of use requirements and audits for license plate readers, we don't have any of that for when a sheriff's deputy searches someone's face against their massive repository of mugshots. And as I testified last week, that database of mugshots is not just Hennepin counties, but they're partnering with other agencies and getting other sheriff's offices mugshots into that system. There's no laws, there's nothing stopping them from you know, just finding a picture on the internet, wondering who that is, and running that against the database. There's also no warrant requirement. Officers don't need a warrant to search that data. So I think I also just wanted to touch on the topic of this information being hard to find and law enforcement not coming forward and talking about it. You know, it took me a lawsuit to find out about that technology. And in some of the emails that I saw, law enforcement openly mocked the fact that the public didn't know, sharing around a WCCO link that said this technology was not in use when they internally knew it was because they're using it. They were laughing at that. They said it's probably best that we keep this out of the limelight. They in fact mentioned that the Data Practices Act is antiquated, and they mentioned in emails that if people found out this technology was being used, it would kind of cause a ruckus and Data Practices Act problems. So I think it's important that the commission look into these issues and I guess formulate legislation. Now is probably the time to do that, not in the future. I don't have it in the packet here, but Georgetown Law did compile a report last year called Perpetual Lineup, and they sent out freedom of information requests around the country and kind of compiled what's happening in each state. And they formulated some model legislation that they included. I'm not saying that legislation is necessarily good, but I think it's something interesting. I think that report is interesting as well. Some of my research in Hennepin County cited in it. So yeah, I think that's it. If you have any questions, I'm happy to.
Senator Limmer.
Mr. Webster, on the Excel data list that you received, was there identifiable information that would identify the driver of the car or the address, the make and model of the car? Can you tell me? I just want to know what you saw.
Sure, Madam Chair and Senator Limmer, it's basically what's included on page 7 and 12, which is the license plate number, which I've redacted, the timestamp, and the geographical location. So no, it doesn't include the make or model information for the vehicle, but it's essentially what was happening back when law enforcement was first using this technology back, 6 or so years ago, the way it was then, where the data is being collected. If I saw a license plate number and I wanted to run it against this database, I might be able to find that they're, say, at a mosque or an abortion clinic type of information. I think this is directly what the law was created to prevent, was this, but this is essentially just one page of that. It was a lot of pages. It was, I have the exact number in my letter to iPad here, but it was about 7,000 reads and about 3,200 hits.
Mr. Webster, is there any way, now, I'm not a techie type person myself, but is there a way how an individual could identify who the owner of these vehicles were? on the list that you were given?
Mr. Webster?
Senator Limmer, I'm not sure from the specific list. I know that as a lot of data gets sort of compiled, there might be ways to work that backwards. I think another concern would be, when I have so many of these reads or hits with the specific geographical coordinates, I could say find someone's house and I could see what license plates are right in front of their house, and I would kind of know whose vehicle that is. I mean, this is essentially just how it was before the law was passed, the state of things. So, I think Duluth knows better now, but I guess it's a concern of mine going forward if law enforcement's doing enough to protect the data.
Madam Chair, I remember,
Senator Limmer?
I remember in the conference committees, it was quite an ordeal to figure out the date of retention of non-subject data. The data of just background people driving through that scan. And, but the final resolution of the legislature was we wanted that information protected. That was the very premise, the spirit of the law. And I'm kind of surprised in the letter that the author of the letter has found it upon themselves to determine that the data that's the subject of your inquiry cannot be used for non-governmental purposes. I'm not sure how they would arrive at that conclusion, but I would suggest that agencies follow the spirit of the law that we painstakingly created, and that was to protect that information of common everyday citizens. And maybe we'll have to revisit whether or not the definition or the excuse given for non-governmental purposes is appropriate to have in our law. And we can redefine it a little bit so there's no question of the legislative intent in this law.
Madam Chair, Senator Limmer, I agree. I think that's specifically the breach provision of the Data Practices Act, and I think what they were getting at by this was that they didn't, because it didn't trigger that notification, Duluth didn't have to tell drivers that their information had been compromised. And so I don't really know that IPAD or Duluth is necessarily in a position to know what someone's purpose is when they just send a DVD out in the mail with all this data. So, yeah.
Well, I think this follows with the topics we heard about last week and why it's important for government entities for there to be as much transparency as possible. And in this case, we have a citizen that picked up on a violation of the law, or at least a troublesome aspect of this audit from the statutory 60-day requirement or allowance for retention. And they clearly have 90 days here in this, and our own government entity that's in charge of reviewing these audits didn't catch it. And so I'm glad that a member of the public did. But there's a lot of things that you're not going to catch because you can't request everything. Thanks for this information. It's certainly enlightening and something for our commission to take a look at and consider. And, the audit stuff is the requirements of these audits and what information should be contained in those that members of the legislature should know about. And do you have suggestions on what information, should be contained in those audits that they're not currently including?
Madam Chair, I saw some of the audits today for the first time that were in the handouts, and I certainly saw some that were better than others. And I think after seeing that, I might go hunting around for more of them and see what I think is good and bad. Certainly, I don't have it in front of me, but one of them mentioned the sort of destruction of data process and how their process was to make sure that data was destroyed was simply to do a query and make sure that none of the results popped in. And that doesn't really speak to IT processes and backups and things like that. So I will be looking into that more going forward, because I think that there maybe needs to be a clear standard of what does audit mean, and what's the specific procedures that they have to go through. Maybe needs to be more definition, because seeing several pages versus just this single attestation letter, I think is a problem. So I'll be looking into that more going forward.
Appreciate that. That's one of the things I'd like the commission to look at and come up with recommendations. And my intention is in January to have some meetings that are just solely around what our recommendations are to the legislature regarding the topics that we've talked about. Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Webster, for bringing this to light. It brings to mind all kinds of questions that I have related to, is the law, are folks that are supposed to abide by the law not sophisticated enough to be able to handle certain technology within the parameters of the law? I don't know. We run into that from time to time in the Data Practices Act, but I'll look at this more thoroughly, this letter you passed out, and make that consideration. I wanted to ask you another question that was tangentially related to this, and that is this. In your practice of searching out evidence of technology or practices that are not known to the legislature, and there are multiple times that this body has been at a disadvantage with not knowing the stuff that came out, including cell phone exploitation devices, LPRs, body cameras, all those rolled out by the decision of independent agencies before we had any opportunity to regulate them reasonably and come up with mandates for policies or whatever. And during this time that these things were going on, there was much ado made about a year and a half ago about the San Bernardino shooter's iPhone and how the FBI could not get a backdoor or hack it. And so Apple was being a friend to terrorists because they refused to provide a master key for a backdoor to the phone. And there was this giant standoff because the FBI said, no, we need a warrant in order to crack this, and so they were going to force a court case. Apparently at a certain point around the early part of 2016, the FBI finally concluded that they might actually lose this. They didn't want a bad precedent, and they announced that no, they were able to force the phone open. That caused me and some other folks some great concern because it showed that a law enforcement agency was, like some of the information you discovered, hiding relevant facts from the public and from policymakers in order to get a beneficial court precedent. And I would like your opinion on, are there areas that this legislature should be looking at where agencies under our purview or under our constitutional review authority have other types of technologies that are available that we should be looking at as reviewers in our duties as legislative oversight individuals. Where should we be looking next? I don't want to get in the same situation where all of a sudden we end up in some giant constitutional crisis standoff on a state level. Do you have any recommendations for us on that?
Mr. Webster?
Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, I think it's difficult for me to even find out what's going on right now. One thing I have done frequently is looked at some of the advertisements that law enforcement is getting and some of the conversations that they're having. That's one of the reasons I make a lot of requests regarding, email discussions, is because I want to know what those discussions are. And that's why I spoke last week about why retention is important. So that's where I kind of find out where things are going. And, right now the discussion seems to be around, facial recognition, both, in the past tense of running an image against a database, but also in real time of having cameras and then detecting faces from them. And I want to be clear, I have no indication that that technology is in use right now, but I have emails from 2 years ago where it was being discussed with vendors. And not just advertisements, but active discussions. That's something I'm seeing now. I'm seeing a lot of discussion regarding predictive policing, of using large data sets to determine where police should be dispatched and sent. Also in the criminal justice system of using data about defendants to determine things like what sentence or bail amount they should be set. I think there's a lot of technology that's being used and discussed, and my problem is that law enforcement is not always eager to talk about it. And in the case of the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, when I asked for emails about it, they came up with these, ingenious excuses of, well, a request to access emails by keyword isn't valid. So we're not having a conversation over, we need this technology to fight crime. We need to keep these emails private. It was a conversation over the validity of a data request. And now I'm in litigation that's lasted, well over 2 years. I'm getting gray hair at this point, and it's like I can only do so many of these. So I think it maybe comes back to the issue of enforcement in the Data Practices Act, of making sure that members of the public, journalists, can access data in a timely fashion. And maybe within the legislature, being able to compel testimony from law enforcement. I've noted specifically that I believe you've had questions regarding the Hennepin County Sheriff's use of technology, I think maybe Stingray, if I'm recalling correctly, and if I recall from those meetings, it was difficult to get testimony or information about what was happening. And so, yeah, I think that's the issue.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Webster. We've got some good law enforcement agencies in this state. They do good work, but they, just like any agency, requires oversight in order for all of us to be acting within the parameters and of what our jobs are. And I think by your the work that you do, you help us do that. So thank you.
Any other questions for this testifying? Thank you, Mr. Webster, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Feist. Welcome to the commission. Please state your name for the record and go on with your testimony.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, my name is Ben Feist. I'm Legislative Director for the ACLU of Minnesota. You're accustomed to seeing me up here as much as you are some of the law enforcement folks who have spoken today on these issues. So thank you very much for taking the time to take a deep dive back into revisiting some of the issues that we've dealt with for several years now, but then also trying to issue spot what might be coming. I don't have a lot new to add. I think this has been a really thorough discussion from my point of view. And I really appreciate getting the updates from the folks in law enforcement. At the same time, it would be nice to hear a little bit more from Minneapolis and St. Paul about how these technologies are being deployed and what types of issues they're seeing there. Clearly, Bloomington and Burnsville have done a really nice job in trying to implement this in the best way and be as transparent as possible. But we know, for example, on the body camera issue, there was the Justine Damon incident where we had too much discretion in the Minneapolis policy, and that's something that both having discretion of when to turn the cameras on and off, something that of course I brought up time and time again up here, hoping for a statewide policy on that. But we're left to making sure that each of the districts that are bringing these in are working appropriately on that and making sure that these technologies that have a lot of potential benefit are actually being used for the public good. And so we continue to have issues with that, and also on the body camera issue with the lack of discipline that's in a lot of these policies. Most of the standards right now in local policies says that some level of discipline will be there if you break the policy, but it does not say specifically what that might look like. And so far, we haven't seen a lot of teeth there. As it's been brought up previously, our constitutional law really can't keep up with this new technology. And the problem that we at the ACLU have seen is that if you don't go after some of the individual technologies as they pop up, hopefully before they become controversies, is that we're applying really old concepts. under our constitutional law. For example, we've talked a little bit about drones or UAVs today. That's been an issue that's popped up. Representative Lesh has a bill currently introduced on that. That would be a good one, I think, for trying to move forward in the upcoming session. And one of the disagreements we have in there, or in that area, is whether we should look at the law on a helicopter in a public space and use established case law on our expectation of privacy for a helicopter, and is that the same thing as a drone, which can be incredibly small and have really high-powered cameras and be very cheap and not require the same kind of manpower. So I only bring that up as an example because all too often the problem from our perspective is that we are not able to get a grasp on how the new technologies fundamentally change our understanding of existing law. And as much as I would like to do, as Senator Schoen brought up, create sort of a comprehensive privacy protection for the people of Minnesota, that would be wonderful, but I don't think we can come to agreement with all of the interested stakeholders on what something like that should look like. So unfortunately, sometimes we need, I think, a deep dive into specific issues. You know, one final piece that I'll bring up today, just because I think it was maybe the only technology issue that I've been working on that hasn't been discussed, is again, this is Representative Lesh's bill, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, dealing with the fact that under sort of an old federal loophole, email left on a server over 6 months is considered abandoned. Going back to maybe another great example of outdated technology, if you leave mail in a mailbox somewhere at the post office after 6 months, they consider that abandoned. And maybe that makes sense. But there might be really good reasons that you leave email on a server. And if that is leaving open unwarranted access by the government to that email, that's a significant problem and something that was addressed in California, and Representative Lesh's bill has proposed a similar alternative here in Minnesota. So I wanted to add that one to the list, but if there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer them at this time.
Representative Lesh.
Well, Madam Chair, more by way of a comment, thank you, Mr. Feist, coming to testify today, and you brought up some items that have been sore points for me, including the issue on the drones. When we had a hearing on the drones, it was a bridge too far because it was at the same time we were trying to do the cell phone exploitation devices, and it was Representative Atkins' bill that passed. Mr. Neumeister flanked me on it with Joe Atkins, and our bill went by the wayside. But so we were working on it. But you know, I note that on the drones piece, when we had our hearing, several agencies came in and say, you know, you don't need to regulate drones or drone usage. And when we asked why, I remember one person from MnDOT came in and said, no, you really shouldn't be regulating drones. And I'm like, what the heck does MnDOT have to say about drones? And the testifier said, well, you know, I don't know, we could use them someday. Which just, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. That's some of the response we get some of this now. But remember, it's the lack of appreciation and respect for, I think, the information that's gleaned from these that we're trying to deal with here under the Data Practices Act. That includes body cams that was brought up. And I'm still sore over this, that when I asked the city of Minneapolis multiple times, do they have a body cam policy, because they rolled them out in advance of the legislation. They promised me they had a policy. I said, well, I'd like to see it. And months later, when I asked again, they finally came around and they passed out a one-page SOP, which I found incredibly insulting and demonstrated, I think, a lack of respect for the information that was collected by these body cams. And it makes me question again, are agencies in a mature enough position to deal with the technologies that somehow they're getting a hold of early? So I don't want that to happen again, and I think hopefully if the penalties are applied, maybe agencies will get the sense that they should look before they leap. But thank you for your work on this, Mr. Feist.
Thank you. And I appreciate you bringing up the 6-month-old email issue as one that kind of felt, I've heard about it, but it's not front and center on my radar, but that's certainly concerning for folks. Is that could we regulate that here in the state of Minnesota? Would that have to be a federal law? Because, I mean, email is, you can't tell necessarily that my email is coming from Minnesota.
Madam Chair, the bill that has been introduced is actually based on California law that a lot of the tech companies have rallied around, as well as privacy advocates, because they want to make sure that there are as many states adhering to the same rules about this as possible. So while it's a little bit complicated, and I think because it's a complicated issue, it's a little bit of a longer bill and difficult to work directly into our current framework and with the Data Practices Act, it had been a little bit harder to tackle since it has been introduced over the last couple of years. But again, I think that's one that certainly can and should be addressed here.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I think we meet again in a couple of weeks. Is that right, Sally? The 28th is our next meeting. So after Thanksgiving, hope everyone has a safe and happy Thanksgiving. Thank you for being here today and for testimony from law enforcement and the public. And we are adjourned.